Chapter 2913 2913 Decapitation. Chapter 2913 2913 Decapitation. 2913 Decapitation. Ling Han sent out his divine sense, like tentacles, and carefully examined the surroundings. Very soon, a smile appeared on his face. It was actually very easy to differentiate whether the creatures had intelligence or not. A monster that did not have intelligence would also exude an incredibly frenzied aura. It only had the thought of slaughter, but if it had intelligence, it would not be so frenzied. Very soon, Ling Han locked onto a target, and then locked onto the second, the third, and so on. He shared the intel about these targets with Fu Yuan, and then said, "Brother Fu, do you think we can still break through the siege after committing murder?" "Of course." Fu Yuan appeared to be filled with confidence. "All right, you take care of those two, and I will deal with the three on this side." Ling Han assigned the targets. If the task cannot be completed, retreat immediately. Fu Yuan nodded. The two of them moved quietly. This was a little ridiculous. They were clearly in the midst of the army, so how could they move quietly? But this army was presently lying in a dormant state. Every single monster was like a stone statue, and as long as the duo did not release any waves of power, it was as if they were invisible. The two each arrived near a specific target and then suddenly moved. 1. Ling Han directly channeled the first-grade seal, and when he shot out a punch, it was extremely domineering. The target immediately came to its senses. This was a human-shaped monster, but had 3 arms. Instantly, all 3 arms waved at the same time and struck out at Ling Han. It had the battle prowess of a late-stage 5th tier. Not only was the power of its 3 arms domineering, a sinister spiritual attack also struck at the same time. Ling Han was slightly surprised because the troops of hysteria that he had previously come into contact with had not been versed in spiritual attacks at all. It was probably the simplest to directly bestow power on one's subordinates. Otherwise, there was no way that hysteria would prevent its subordinates from becoming stronger. Pung! As he thought this, Ling Han's punch didn't stop at all, forcibly shattering the 3 arms of the selected monster. With the addition of the first-grade seal, his battle prowess was too strong. The surging spiritual attack was ground into nothing by the powers of dimension in his body. Ling Han's fist was unstoppable, and as the attack landed, the target was instantly blown up. The sudden assault, added with the crushing advantage in strength, caused this monster to be unable to block even a single move from Ling Han. On the other side, though Fu Yuan had also launched a sneak attack, his strength was inferior to Ling Han's. Being hit by a spiritual attack, he immediately showed an expression of pain. Even a heavenly venerate would be slightly affected by this kind of attack. Boom! The army that had initially been dead silent suddenly rioted. All the monsters opened their eyes at the same time, their murderous aura soaring into the skies. They set their aim on Ling Han and Fu Yuan, and then attacked madly. Pung, pung, pung. One after another, attacks assailed them. There were 5th tier, 4th tier, 3rd tier, 2nd tier, 1st tier, and even some pseudo-heavenly venerable tier attacks, and all them blasted towards Ling Han and Fu Yuan. Ling Han hurriedly ducked, using the bodies of the monsters as his cover. Every single one of Hysteria's creations was extremely huge. Though Ling Han was surrounded, he was actually also protected. Attacks from afar could not reach him at all, and would be blocked by these monsters that were nearer to him. These monsters were ferocious, and did not even care that their own companions were standing in front of them. They just continued to attack madly. Without intelligence, that was how it was. Ling Han took advantage of the chaos to make a move. He then charged towards the second target. The first-grade seal showed its might, and he was unstoppable. Pung, pung, pung. The monsters that stood in front of him were no match for him at all, and were blasted into dust by him. A considerable number of monsters flew up, releasing a strange, ear-piercing screech. All of a sudden, all the monsters no longer attacked blindly. The monsters that were in front of them stepped back one after another, freeing up space so that the army behind them could fire attacks simultaneously. In a single round, there would be several thousand strikes attacking them at the same time. Those few naturally were intelligent monsters. Ling Han saw this clearly. It was good that these guys had exposed themselves. They were locked on by his divine sense and could no longer hide themselves. Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han was being attacked madly, but the millions and millions of cells in his body channeled their power, turning into millstones and crushing the attacks that assaulted him. There was actually a portion that was still absorbed by him and turned into something akin to supplies for him. Of course, there were also some attacks that were too powerful and could not be crushed. They still caused some damage to him, but the threat they posed was much smaller and only caused him slight pain. Ling Han laughed loudly. His powers of dimension continued to grow, and they actually had such an effect. However, upon further thought, this wasn't strange. The accommodating ability of dimensions was extremely strong. For example, the Flaming Frost Realm could completely withstand a great battle between elites of the 6th tier, at least. When there came a day the powers of dimension in Ling Han's body reached the level of great accomplishment, he himself would be a Genesis world. What power would be able to crush him? There was definitely none. Of course, the arrival of this day was boundlessly far ahead in the future, and who knew how long he would need to cultivate for. Ling Han bravely forged onwards and began a massacre. However, the Hysteria army was madly filling up the holes that he had created, all of them completely putting their lives on the line and hindering Ling Han's progress, even if he was so incomparably fierce. He was clearly only 50 kilometers away from a target, and originally it had only been a matter of taking a step, yet now it seemed to have become an endless distance. No matter how hard he tried, he could not reach it. That target was a lupin monster, but it was standing on its hind legs. A cold smirk appeared at the corners of its lips, and it sent out a message through divine sense saying, "I am very impressed that the two of you dare to charge here, but this is only courting death." "That may not be the case," Ling Han said calmly. "Your fate has already been decided. The Flaming Frost Realm's fate has already been decided, and Genesis World's fate has already been decided as well," the wolf-shaped monster said in a disdainful tone. "Master's brilliance will ultimately devour everything. I say, since you have already developed intelligence, why do you still have to work for Hysteria?" Ling Han began to drive a wedge between the monster and its master. "You naturally know that your final fate will be either to die on the battlefield or to be swallowed by Hysteria after you succeed, and you will no longer be you. Is this what you want?" This kind of intelligent creation was unlike Meng Dong and the others. They were created from Hysteria having split out a part of itself, so they were unafraid of death and regarded it as their return to the main body. The wolfish monster remained silent, but it merely did not choose to argue with Ling Han. On the sidelines, it commanded with its divine sense, mobilizing the army to launch a mad offensive against Ling Han and Fu Yuan. Ling Han let out a battle cry, and all the 9th grade seals in his body were channeled. His power increased explosively again. Pung, pung, pung. One punch after another blasted out, and no one could withstand them. Like a bolt of lightning, Ling Han charged toward the lupin monster, and no one could stop him. The wolfish monster had not thought that Ling Han would be so powerful. It hurriedly wanted to retreat, but how could it manage to do so in time? In an instant, it was killed by Ling Han. However, there were definitely not just 2 leader monsters here. Though the death of 2 of them had caused some chaos in the army of monsters, new leaders appeared to command their troops. Furthermore, they themselves had hidden far away and did not involve themselves in any danger. In this way, it would become extremely and extraordinarily difficult for Ling Han to kill another leader monster. He swept his gaze around and saw that Fu Yuan had already fallen into desperate straits. By the looks of it, he would definitely not be able to last more than 10 breaths' time. Chapter 2914. 2914 Retreating After Success. Chapter 2914. 2914 Retreating After Success. 2914 Retreating After Success. Ling Han instantly made a decision. Unleashing his full strength, he charged towards Fu Yuan. Several of the leader monsters continuously sent out orders, but did not go all out to stop Ling Han's approach. After all, the two intruders were already trapped. What would letting them regroup change? "Brother Ling, don't mind me. You can break out of the siege on your own," Fu Yuan said. Even though he was a 5th tier, he was panting and covered in blood. Ling Han laughed. "We came here together. We're going back together." "Dream on," a monkey-like leader beast coldly said. It sent out a different command, and in an instant millions and millions of arrows formed by energy shot forth. Ling Han and Fu Yuan were sure to suffer greatly from such an onslaught. Ling Han grabbed on to Fu Yuan. "Brother Fu, watch out!" He struck out with his other palm, creating a rip in space and then dove in. Shoo! The two of them disappeared in an instant. They ran into the void. The monkey made weird screeching noises and scoffed. "Besides Master, everyone else is akin to a headless fly inside the void. Do they think they'll be able to escape?" All the monsters ripped space open and gave chase. But the void was a chaotic place with energy storms all around. To say nothing of finding Ling Han and Fu Yuan, a lot of the creatures were torn to shreds by the storms the second they stepped in. Strange. Where could they have gone? Without dimension coordinates, not even Hysteria would be able to enter a dimension as it pleased. But what about Ling Han? As Ling Han took another step, he found his way back to the Flaming Frost realm from the void. But when he stepped out of the void, the Flaming Frost realm felt too different from expectations, as the location he was currently in wasn't the realm battlefield at all. "Oh, where is this?" Fu Yuan was still a little surprised at having escaped death. He looked around his surroundings in shock and exclaimed, "The Flaming Frost realm!" He looked at Ling Han. "Brother Ling, do you have the ability to traverse dimensions?" If it had been just a rip in space, then they wouldn't have been able to run far. They could try to walk back the same way, but there was a high chance of them getting lost forever within the emptiness of the void. There was no telling how long they would need to be able to return. However, Ling Han had done so in a very casual manner. It was natural for Fu Yuan to be shocked. Ling Han chuckled. "I told you, we came together, so we're going back together too." When Ling Han had said this to him previously, Fu Yuan had thought Ling Han had been just trying to console him. However, now he was simply shocked beyond words. "I never thought Brother Ling would be able to freely traverse dimensions." Fu Yuan was still trying to wrap his head around that revelation. "No wonder you were so calm. Now, even if we have to take a high-risk mission, we don't have to worry." Ling Han broke into laughter. "I can't compare with Brother Fu in that regard. You're the brave one." "I'm embarrassed. In the end, I still needed Brother Ling's help to escape." Fu Yuan shook his head. "Even though we weren't able to completely decimate our opponents, we still managed to kill 2 of their leaders. That's more than enough." Ling Han smiled and continued, "Let's go back." The 2 of them turned around, and they returned to the realm battlefield in a few days. When everyone saw that it was Ling Han and Fu Yuan, they were utterly shocked. Some of them had seen the 2 of them leaving the city, and not long after, a commotion broke out in the Hysteria army. However, that commotion died down soon after, and everyone thought that Ling Han and Fu Yuan had been killed. This was a very reasonable conjecture. How could they have survived after being trapped by the enemy? But now, Ling Han and Fu Yuan were back in one piece. It was natural for everyone to feel like they were looking at a couple of ghosts. Soon the entire base was astir. Lin Yulian, Xian Chihu, and Wu Haoyang immediately convened a meeting and requested for Ling Han's and Fu Yuan's presence. Ling Han, you've accomplished your mission? Xian Chihu immediately asked. That depends on how Brother Xian defines the word accomplished, Ling Han said, smiling. Xian Chihu snorted. Don't be glib. Fine. Ling Han nodded, and then continued. Brother Fu and I went deep into enemy lines and managed to kill 2 of their leaders. Have you got any proof? Xian Chihu continued. How am I supposed to know you didn't just kill a bunch of monsters in the outer regions and then sneaked your way back here? A lot of the 5th tier heavenly venerates frowned at his statement. Aren't you just blindly looking for fault here? Those from the Ling Alliance were even more furious. Xian Chihu had gone too far. I knew you would ask that. Ling Han casually waved his hand, and 2 broken corpses suddenly appeared on the ground. Here's the proof you wanted. What can 2 corpses prove? Xian Chihu asked. Ling Han smiled. These 2 corpses should still contain a bit of aura. I trust everyone here has plenty of experience fighting against Hysteria's creations. You should be able to tell the difference. Everyone focused their senses and soon nodded in agreement. The aura from these 2 monsters was indeed different from that of the rest, which only contained violence and madness. Against such hard facts, Xian Chihu had no words to counter. He could use his status to oppress Ling Han, but he couldn't twist the facts to his liking. After all, there was still Lin Yulian and Wu Haoyang. How could he do as he pleased? So you only killed 2? Xian Chihu continued to taunt. There are at least 5 leaders in Hysteria's army. You call killing 2 a success? Ling Han laughed. I never said I was definitely going to complete this mission. Besides, do you honestly think that was realistic to begin with? Everyone shook their head. It had not been realistic at all. Previously, everyone had been sure that Ling Han would not have been able to return. However, not only did he come back in one piece, he had even managed to kill 2 prime targets. This was a grand achievement. Yet Xian Chihu still refused to acknowledge Ling Han's success, and was even trying to make him look bad. This was too much. Brother Xian, you've gone too far. Lin Yulian finally spoke. Her tone was cold, and she was evidently angered by Xian Chihu. Wu Haoyang nodded in agreement as well. Even though he had lost to Ling Han, he simply wanted a fair test of strength between them in order to prove himself. He never thought of using underhanded methods to oppress Ling Han. Xian Chihu chuckled. He wasn't bothered, even if the whole world was against him. Since your mission is incomplete, then you are to carry on. Xian Chihu said to Ling Han. What? What he meant was that Ling Han was to go back to the enemy territory and kill the rest of the leaders. Is he mad? Ling Han clearly had been able to succeed the first time because the Hysteria army had never thought that he would be so bold. However, it was unlikely the same miracle would happen twice. How would Ling Han be able to succeed again? He would be marching to his death if he went back. Ling Han was just as surprised as everyone else. He knew that Xian Chihu was trying to pressure him, but he never thought he'd do it so flagrantly. How utterly shameless. You're still hailed as one of the greatest prodigies of all eternity. Have some self-respect, won't you? Everyone, don't you think that Ling Han is the best man for the job? Xian Chihu said loudly. Ask yourselves, would you have a chance to escape if you found yourself surrounded on all sides by the enemy? Ling Han does, and he has managed to come back in one piece. Ling Han, don't you think you should cast aside your ego for the bigger picture? For the sake of the Flaming Frost Realm and all of us here, do you think it's right for you to hide and cower? His last question was addressed directly to Ling Han. Chapter 2915. 2915 Overbearing Attitude. Chapter 2915. 2915 Overbearing Attitude. 2915 Overbearing Attitude. Actually, while the reasoning behind Xian Chihu's words was quite twisted, it did have some logic. If Hysteria's army was allowed to once again form a super large-scale army, then such an army would be able to explode with terrifying destructive power under the command of the intelligent monsters. This fact had already been proven. So, if Ling Han was capable, then Ling Han should be the one to go. Well said. Brother Nalen immediately said loudly, Ling Han, everyone is making sacrifices for the sake of the world. We can make sacrifices, so why can't you? He hated Ling Han to the core, and when he saw that Ling Han had come back alive, he was naturally incredibly surprised. One might have been fortunate enough to come back alive once, but would one be able to come back alive a second time or a third time? Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle. Xian Chihu's shamelessness in such a self-righteous manner made him totally speechless, and this Brother Nalen was disgusting indeed. Ling Han, for the sake of the greater picture, we'll have to trouble you to bear the burden for a bit, Xian Chihu said. Then he looked at the other people. Everyone, what do you all think? Without waiting for anyone to express their stand, he continued, if Hysteria's army launches another attack, it can be imagined how terrifying the consequences will be. Perhaps our city defense will be breached, and perhaps there will be a considerable number of people here who will disappear forever. When these words were spoken, everyone fell silent. Even those who had wanted to speak remained silent. The scene described by Xian Chihu had a great possibility of becoming a reality. Who would want to die? Not even a single person. Therefore, since someone had to be sacrificed, it would be fine as long as it wasn't going to be themselves. Moreover, the various forces had been fighting with each other previously, and had long since lost their unity. It was their own interests that mattered most. Therefore, some people even nodded their heads in agreement with Xian Chihu's statement. That's right, those who are capable should do more. Since Ling Han can escape once, I believe he can also escape a second time or a third time. Those intelligent monsters are too terrifying, they must be killed. Ling Han, for the sake of the greater picture, and for the sake of the world, you'll have to compromise. The words that these people uttered, using great principles to suppress Ling Han. Fuck, did they really think that he was an easy target to bully? Ling Han's gaze turned sinister. In fact, Xian Chihu didn't need to force him, as Ling Han wasn't the kind of person who would give up halfway, and he had already made up his mind to re-enter Hysteria's camp and kill more boss monsters. After all, it was everyone's responsibility to defend the Flaming Frost Realm, and Ling Han was duty-bound to do so. However, being forced into it was a completely different matter. Ling Han was displeased, extremely displeased. Since everyone thinks that Ling Han is the best candidate to complete this mission, then it's decided. Xian Chihu looked at Ling Han smilingly. This was decided by everyone. Lin Yulian couldn't help but frown. Xian Chihu was really impressive. It was clearly an unreasonable matter, yet he actually made it seem as if it was right and appropriate, making her not know what else to say. Was this matter fair to Ling Han? Of course it wasn't fair. However, with Hysteria's invasion, was it a matter that would be considered as fair to anyone concerned? Ling Han had returned. Had he been covered with injuries, she could have used the excuse that Ling Han needed to recuperate from his injuries and suppress this matter. However, Ling Han was completely unwounded and appeared to be very much at ease. Then, for the sake of the Genesis world, for the sake of all life in the world, who would go if not him? Ling Han looked at Xian Chihu. Sick cat, I didn't expect you to be so shameless one. Watch your words. Otherwise, I won't mind teaching you a lesson, Xian Chihu said calmly. His eyes burned, exuding a sinister, killing intent. Ling Han chuckled. He would beat this guy into a sick cat one day. Anyway, he was free to come and go anywhere. Xian Chihu thought that he had created a huge obstacle and pushed Ling Han into the fire pit, but in fact Ling Han didn't care. However, being publicly oppressed by Xian Chihu, Ling Han was naturally extremely displeased. He really wanted to pin him down and beat the crap out of him. This caused him to feel suffocated. It wasn't the reason why Xan Chihu dared to be so arrogant, because he possessed the battle prowess of a 6th tier. Ling Han definitely had to improve his cultivation level and abilities as soon as possible and beat up this sick cat. With a flourish of his sleeves, Ling Han turned around and left, appearing very furious. Of course, this was for people to see. One couldn't be happy in such a situation, right? Besides, he was indeed extremely upset. When he returned, the Empress and the others came out of the celestial guest residence. Upon hearing about this matter, they were also extremely displeased. If it was not for the fact that the gap in strength was too wide, they would really want to crush Xan Chihu into dust. This damn bastard, Nyo curses him to fall into the cesspit and drown. Hunyo snorted. Sores to grow on his head. Pus to ooze out from the soles of his feet. Lu Yutong, Li Sikhan, and other women made similar statements. Ling Han laughed. As long as he was with these women, he would feel happy and be at ease from the bottom of his heart. Is Brother Ling there? A voice came from outside. Who is it? All the women were surprised. When they went out, they saw a young man standing at the door with a gentle smile on his face, making people feel comfortable just looking at him. This was a 4th tier heavenly venerate, but the feeling that Ling Han got from him was that he was extremely powerful. It was extremely likely that his battle prowess wasn't any weaker than his own. It was quite astonishing. The gap between 4th tier and 5th tier was as wide as the distance between heaven and earth, being at 4th tier and yet having the battle prowess of 5th tier. In fact, there were only Lin Yolian, Xan Chihu, and the other supreme prodigies that counted in that category. That was why Ling Han was stunned. How could a supreme prodigy appear so casually? How should I address you, sir? Ling Han asked with a smile. He didn't know why the other party had come, so he naturally used civilities before resorting to force. The young man revealed an awkward expression. My surname is Bai. Ling Han looked at him in disbelief. He was done just by saying that his surname was Bai. The youngster, surnamed Bai, hesitated for a moment and then said, By Myfin. Pooh! Ling Han and the others spluttered in laughter. No wonder this person was so hesitant. As it turned out, he had such a weird name, too. Are you always hungry? Hunyo asked. Otherwise, how could he be given such a name? How pitiful. Bai Myfin smiled and said, This name was given to me by my grandfather. This is something that the old man has decided, so what can I do about it? He cupped his hands in obeisance, appearing very helpless. Your grandfather is really interesting. Ling Han thought of a word. I can also be considered as having encountered an ill fate, Bai Myfin said leisurely. What has brought Brother Bai here? Ling Han asked. I want to participate in Brother Ling's decapitation operation, Bai Myfin said. Yeah. Ling Han was taken aback. Besides Fu Yuan, there was actually another such fool. Brother Bai, don't you know that it's very dangerous? He asked. What meaning is there to it if it's not dangerous? Bai Myfin said with a smile. Though his expression was gentle, he had an indescribable confidence. That was a pride that came from deep within his bones. It's a good thing that you're brave, but what about Brother Bai's strength? Ling Han said with a serious expression. Brother Ling, let's have a spar. Bai Myfin smiled. All right, come. The two of them soared into the air, and Bai Myfin immediately launched an attack. His palm pressed down upon Ling Han. Hong! A terrifying aura spread out. As expected, he had 5th tier battle prowess. Chapter 2916 2916 Chapter 2918 by Myfin. Chapter 2916 2916 Chapter 2918 by Myfin. 2916 Chapter 2918 by Myfin. Ling Han had a solemn expression. This person was undoubtedly a prodigy and wasn't any weaker than Lin Yulian and the rest. However, he wasn't famous. Sai, Was it because his name was by Myfin that he had managed to stay so low-key? The introduction sure didn't make for a strong first impression. A person capable of defeating multiple elites, and he went by the name by Myfin. It was pretty funny to think about. By Myfin rushed over with both palms striking out. The earth rumbled and huge gusts of wind billowed under the terrifying force. Fortunately, this was the intersection between both realms, with the void taking up a huge section of the space. As such, there was no need to be concerned about the level of destruction. Otherwise, even a medium-level dimension would be destroyed by the force of 2/5 tiers clashing. The two exchanged blows to test the waters. Brother Ling is truly no ordinary man to be able to harness the strength of a 5th tier at just 3rd tier. I am thoroughly impressed. By Myfin gave his heartfelt praise. Even though he wasn't famous, he was extremely proud, and didn't even consider prodigies like Lin Yolian and Xian Chi-Hu on the same level as him. He was sure he wouldn't lose against any of them. However, when fighting against Ling Han, he couldn't contain his admiration. Ling Han was definitely the first person ever to be able to fight on an equal level with him, despite his strength being lower by 1 whole tier. You're pretty good too. Ling Han nodded. There definitely weren't a lot of people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with this by Myfin. By Myfin lightly chuckled. However, one's base strength is only but a tiny aspect of their battle prowess, and is not the determining factor of a fight. Show me what other powerful moves you have then. Ling Han was excited to see what other techniques by Myfin was going to display. As by Myfin clenched his right hand, another seal lit up. He launched another attack, but this time his strength increased by at least 30 times from his previous attacks, using a 6th grade seal from the get-go. What a rich guy! Ling Han was curious whether that heavenly venerable seal was created by Myfin himself, or he was given it by an elder. He also activated his own 6th grade seal and clashed with by Myfin. The two of them were both around late-stage 5th tier in strength, and the boost they received from their heavenly venerable seals was also more or less similar in capacity. As such, they were pretty evenly matched. However, the destructive force behind their clashes was tremendous, so much so that even the Empress and the rest couldn't find any room to step in. After a few short clashes, by Myfin finally started using his true strength. He activated a sword technique. There was nothing his sword couldn't sever with its cold light. It was truly terrifying. Ling Han also took out his divine demon sword and met by Myfin head-on. Neither side was giving an inch. Ling Han was not anxious at all. Given that Ling Han was 1 tier lower, by Myfin was the one who would surely be anxious if they came to a draw. As expected, by Myfin started to increase the tenacity of his attacks, activating his other heavenly venerable seals, and increasing his own battle prowess. 40, 50, 60 times, by Myfin had an astonishing number of heavenly venerable seals, and each one got rarer than the last. Ling Han couldn't help but be curious about his background when he saw how many resources he had. However, Ling Han didn't pale in comparison, either. He activated several high-grade heavenly venerable seals, and managed to keep up with by Myfin's increase in strength. Eventually, by Myfin activated another seal. Suddenly, he gave off an oppressive aura, as though he had become an unbeatable god. A 1st grade seal. Ling Han was shocked as he thought, "Damn, how can this be? Someone else actually came into possession of a 1st grade seal?" Boom! By Myfin slashed with his sword the terrifying force behind it capable of slashing the world in half. This was the result of using a 1st grade seal to supplement one's strength. It was truly horrifying. However, Ling Han was not afraid. He also had a 1st grade seal, as well as 2 complete sets of combination seals. If he used that, then it would actually be horrific. Boom, boom, boom. The clash between them caused the earth to shake, which naturally drew the attention of many people. When they realized that the person Ling Han was facing was a never-before-seen youngster, they were all surprised. Who is that guy? A fourth tier with a fifth tier's battle prowess. He isn't any weaker than those three. But how did someone like that just pop out of nowhere? He even has a first grade seal. Dear God, could he be the successor of some seventh tier venerate? Everyone was curious, but no matter how much they asked, no one knew of Bai Meifin's true identity. Ling Han felt a thump in his chest as he thought, don't tell me this guy is one of Hysteria's moles like Meng Dong. There were about 100 people in the Flaming Frost realm who had already risen to Heavenly Venerate status, and each of them should have mastered a Heavenly Venerable seal. It was too presumptuous to think that Bai Meifin was an agent of Hysteria just based on that. Not to mention, while Meng Dong and his gang had the ability to fight against people of a higher tier, they were nowhere near the extent of this Bai Meifin. The latter's strength was definitely enough to group him with the likes of Lin Yulien and Xian Chihu. As Ling Han pondered such thoughts, his hands didn't slack in the slightest. On the contrary, he got even more aggressive. Good, how fun! Bai Meifin excitedly said, take another move from me. He was completely lost in the excitement of battle, no longer addressing Ling Han as Brother Ling, nor using a polite tone when speaking. As he shouted in fervor, his right eye suddenly emitted a light, creating an illusion which quickly transformed into a single world. While the world was small, like a sparrow, it had everything needed for survival: mountains, rivers, seas, and lakes. The world was an empty land without any signs of life. Ling Han frowned slightly as he felt the terrifying pressure. This world seemed all too real to him. Go, Bai Meifin commanded, and the world descended towards Ling Han. Boom! It was as though an entire world was pressing down on him. Ling Han soon realized, this is the dimension that you fused into your body. Indeed. Bai Meifin wasn't shy about admitting it and nodded in acknowledgement. However, I have yet to refine it to the great accomplishment level. As such, I am only able to harness 10% of its strength. This was too terrifying. Using an entire world to suppress your opponent was definitely taken in the literal sense here. So there is such a use for the small world inside your body. Even if it only had 10% of the strength, it was still too shocking. Ling Han felt an immense desire to avoid this attack at all costs, or he would be crushed to a pulp. However, this was still a sparring session. Wouldn't he be admitting defeat if he didn't take this move head-on? He cast away his sword. Boom! Utilizing all his 9th grade seals, Ling Han increased his battle prowess to the maximum output and punched out furiously. If he wanted to be even stronger, he would have to use his 8th grade combination seals. However, this was his trump in the sleeve right now. Boom! As the world descended, Ling Han punched back relentlessly. Bang, bang, bang. With each fist, the world would crack slightly, and by the time it was just on top of Ling Han's head, it was full of tiny fissures. Bang! As Ling Han punched back one last time, the world finally crumbled. An enormous amount of energy sprayed forth, causing tremors throughout the entire base. What a terrifying attack! Ling Han was also a little exhausted. He had only launched a few thousand punches, but he was already feeling the fatigue from it all. It was evident the amount of pressure he had been under. The onlookers around them were also astonished. No one expected the 4th tier that had suddenly come out of nowhere to be this vicious. Who the hell was this guy? Chapter 2917. 2917, what is your father's name? Chapter 2917. 2917, what is your father's name? 2917, what is your father's name? Seeing that Bai Meifin was about to make another move, Ling Han quickly waved his hand. All right, stop. It's enough. I admit that you are qualified to join my team. He didn't want to expose his strongest trick in full view. It was meant as a surprise for someone. Bai Meifin couldn't get enough of it and said, you are the first person to take on this technique of mine among peers of the same cultivation level. No, you are even just a 3rd tier. You really deserve the evaluation of my ancestor and Master Lin. Dare I ask what's your name? Lin Yulian said. She didn't know that there were still other hidden talents under her command. Bai Maifin couldn't help but blush. He really didn't want to say his own name. Ling Han laughed loudly. This is brother Bai Maifin. Pooh! Abruptly, a great many burst out laughing. If it wasn't Bai Maifin's deliberate deception, then this guy's parents would be really reckless. Lin Yulian's delicate body trembled, and she said, Is your grandfather Lord Bai Fan? Many young people immediately burst into laughter again. The grandfather was called Bai Fan, while the grandson was called Bai Maifin. They really were a family one. So, what was the name of Bai Fan's son and Bai Maifin's father? They were truly very curious, but the older people gasped and revealed shocked expressions. It's Lord Bai's grandson. No wonder he is so powerful. He's not at all inferior to Lin Yulian and Xian Chi-Hu in terms of background. 7th tier, heavenly venerate, Lord Bai Fan. Even Ling Han was surprised. He knew that Bai Maifin should have a great background, but he didn't expect that the latter was also a descendant of 7th tier. Remembering his suspicions of Bai Maifin previously, Ling Han shook his head. How could a 7th tier's grandson be the remnant of Hysteria? If he couldn't even distinguish this, then would the 7th tier still be qualified to fight against Hysteria? After everyone recovered from this shocking news, they were once again taken by surprise. Bai Maifin wanted to join Ling Han's team and participate in the decapitation operation. Wasn't this guy afraid of death? Hysteria's army didn't care whose grandson you were. There was only one word for it: kill. No matter how freakish you were, you only had 5th tier battle prowess, after all. So what could you use against the infinite Hysteria army? However, the blood of some people was ignited. Ling Han returned from the front line alive and killed 2 leaders of Hysteria's army. Now, even the grandson of an exalted 7th tier wanted to join this team, which made many passionate people eager as well. A young man stood up with a faint smile and said, I also want to apply to join. You are. Ling Han looked at that person. This was a 5th tier, but he had been too low-key before and had never said a word previously as if he had been heir. I am Xian Feng, this young man replied calmly. Brother Xian Feng. Ling Han nodded. Since he was a 5th tier, there was no need to test his strength. Who, having cultivated to this level, wasn't a genius among geniuses. Ling Han, congratulations, the team has expanded again. Can you kill a few more leaders of Hysteria this time? Xian Chi-Hu, who also appeared, said lightly, his expression unchanged. Naturally, he would not be moved, because he was the commander-in-chief, the person in charge of the overall situation. Ling Han was merely a pawn of his now. Just your best, Ling Han said, also lightly, while looking at Xian Chi-Hu, his eyes full of challenge. It's not just to do our best, but to ensure that the mission is complete. Nalin Xiong took a step forward. He was now very close to Xian Chi-Hu, and there were some things that weren't convenient for Xian Chi-Hu to say, so he would speak up for him. A fox makes use of a tiger's might too. Bai Maifin seemed to be talking to himself, then walked up to Ling Han and looked directly at Nalin Xiong with an expression that said, if you are upset, then I will beat the crap out of you. Naturally, Nalin Xiong wasn't intimidated by Bai Maifin. When a 5th tier went against a 4th tier, no matter how freakish the latter was, the former was confident that he would be undefeated. But Nalin Xiong was afraid of the one behind Bai Maifin. That was a 7th tier, a supreme being. Only those who had cultivated to the 5th tier knew how difficult it was to leap from the 4th tier to 5th tier, and even more how difficult it was to go up even a little bit from there. In their eyes, a 7th tier was simply a godlike existence who could not be surpassed and could only be looked up to. How many years had passed since ancient times, but how many 7th tiers were there? A 7th tier was immortal, So even if the limited number of seventh tiers were entangled by the Hysteria's main body, and it was impossible for them to return, everyone still respected the seventh tier's families. This was the prestige of a seventh tier. Bai Maifin could speak freely, but Nailan Xiong had to be more careful. Why, you don't accept it? Bai Maifin was gentle on the surface, but in fact he was extremely proud and could only acknowledge true prodigies. If you don't accept it, I will beat you into accepting. Do you dare to fight me? Ling Han stretched out his hand to stop him. They are all our own people, so why are we speaking of fighting? Everyone was surprised that Ling Han actually spoke up for outsiders. Could it be that the sun had risen from the west? Even Nailan Xiong was surprised. Could it be that Ling Han was about to yield to Xan Chihu, so he began to give in? Since Brother Nailan cares so much, why don't you join our team, and we'll let you supervise the battle? How about it? Ling Han smiled. This sentence immediately made Nailan Xiong's face turn green. He didn't know how Ling Han had escaped before, but even if Ling Han had the ability to do it again, he definitely wouldn't take Nailan Xiong with him. When the time came, Ling Han and the others would return safely, but Nailan Xiong would go down in history forever. Who would do that kind of thing? Nailan Xiong shook his head hastily and looked at Xan Chihu, fearing that the other party would fall for Ling Han's mockery and really send him as a representative. Ha ha ha. Seeing Nailan Xiong's appearance, everyone laughed. It was a shame that a dignified fifth tier was played so badly. Nailan Xiong also had a hot face. He really wanted to fight Ling Han, but he swallowed his anger when he recalled Ling Han's strength. Ling Han set out tonight. Speed is everything in war, Xan Chihu said, not allowing Ling Han to refuse. He waved his hand, turned and left. Ling Han gestured a middle finger to his back, and then looked at the two people beside him. You two, are you ready to have a big fight? Sure. No problem. Both Bai Maifin and Xian Feng were very calm, as if they were not going to kill the enemy in Hysteria's base camp, but were going on a day trip to some famous place or historic site. Haha, such a fun thing, how can I miss it? Fu Yuan laughed and walked over. Okay. Ling Han laughed, full of pride. Then, let's have a big fight. All four stretched out a hand each and placed them one on top of the other. By the way, Brother Bai, I'm curious about your father's name, Xian Feng said suddenly with a smile on his face. I'm also curious. Fu Yuan nodded. Hunyo leaned closer, turned her head exaggeratedly and pricked her ears. Bai Maifin couldn't help being embarrassed. Aren't you guys going too far? Not at all, Ling Han, Hunyo, Xian Feng, and others said in unison. Bai Maifin sighed, hesitated again and said, My father's name is Bai Chi 3. Pooh! Everyone burst out laughing. Chapter 2918. 2918, Another Round of Killing. Chapter 2918. 2918, Another Round of Killing. 2918, Another Round of Killing. It could only be said that Old Man Bai Fan was really quite humorous, as his son and grandson had both been given incomparably weird names by him. Of course, Bai Fan's father wasn't a simple character, either. Had he not set a good example, there would have been no such rising stars as Bai Chi and Bai Maifin. Ling Han had always thought that his ability to give names was terrible, but someone had upped the ante in this category, and he was indeed convinced of it today. Okay, joking's over, let's get going, Ling Han said with a serious expression. The four of them set off, heading towards Hysteria's base camp. Not long after, they were already drawing near. After suffering losses once, currently not all of the Hysteria army went to rest, but there were actually some monsters standing guard. All of them were multi-eyed monsters, sending out waves of divine sense and scanning the surrounding environment. These sentries were merely fourth tiers, but they were indeed completely sufficient as guards. The figures of Ling Han and the others trembled, and their aura changed immediately. They transformed into the same appearance as Hysteria's troops, and their aura was also similar. If one was to just give them a customary glance, it would be impossible to detect their disguise. But it would be different if one was to scan over them carefully, as their true colors would definitely be revealed. It didn't matter, since these monsters weren't the intelligent type. In fact, they were extremely dim-witted. Ling Han and the other three took large strides as they entered the camp. The divine sense of those sentry guards merely swept over them and didn't stay long upon them at all. The four began to look for targets to snipe and soon locked down on 3 of them. In order to ensure a successful strike, Brother Bai and I will each be in charge of one, while the other will be entrusted to Brother Xianfeng and Brother Fu, Ling Han said as he assigned the tasks. We will kill these 3 monsters today. All right. Bai Meifan and the others nodded in unison. Neither Bai Meifan nor Xianfeng asked Ling Han how to break out of the siege once the mission was completed. They believed in Ling Han. The 4 took their positions and then launched an attack simultaneously. Pooh! As soon as Ling Han made a move, he went all out. He channeled the first-grade seal, thereby boosting his strength to more than 80 times, and his power was unstoppable. The leader monster didn't react at all, and its head was instantly blown off by Ling Han. He immediately put away the opponent's body, and then leapt towards Bai Meifan. Bai Meifan also attacked with his full strength, his eyes glowing as he projected a world to suppress his target. But his target was surprisingly strong, and actually managed to withstand this blow. Seeing that all the monsters around opened their eyes, exuding endless hostility, Bai Meifan shouted again. His left eye also opened wide, and out flew a second world. There were actually 2 dimensions in his body. Boom! This power was too great. The target monster let out a shrill scream, and sent out a spiritual attack in its death throes. Bai Meifan let out a muffled groan, but the descent of the 2 worlds continued unabated. Pum! The target monster was instantly crushed to bits. Boom! This was the projection of 2 dimensions, so how terrifying was this power? Immediately, a strong shock wave in the shape of a mushroom spread out, charging in all directions. Pung, pung, pung! Countless Hysteria troops were sent flying, and they had no time at all to make a move, giving Bai Meifan buffer time. When the attacks from further away reached him, Bai Meifan had also recovered from the spiritual attack. He immediately turned around and rushed towards Fu Yuan and Xianfeng. These 2 people were not as strong as Ling Han and Bai Meifan, so even if they used all their ultimate moves, they still couldn't kill the target. They only managed to inflict severe injuries on it. Don't bother about it, Ling Han said, his figure charging over. Prepare to retreat. The 4 of them charged murderously in a single direction. As long as they could meet at one point, Ling Han would be able to tear a rip in space and take the 3 of them away. Wishful thinking, a leader monster said coldly. It commanded the troops, mobilized the army to carry out a fierce attack, and kept Ling Han and the others separated from one another, preventing them from reuniting. Ling Han let out a long roar. Even if Bai Meifan and the others possessed freakish abilities, they wouldn't be able to withstand a simultaneous attack from tens of thousands of opponents with 5th-tier power. He had to take them out quickly. Pung, pung, pung. He channeled the 9th-grade combination seals, and he was unstoppable. Brother Bai, keep up with me. He first joined up with Bai Meifan, and then charged towards Xianfeng and Fu Yuan. He teamed up with Bai Meifan, and their battle prowess was astonishing, being invincible all the way. Just as it seemed like they were about to reach Fu Yuan and Xianfeng, the situation suddenly changed, and Fu Yuan and Xianfeng were unexpectedly separated. Ling Han had no choice but to first charge towards Xianfeng, who was closer to him. He rescued him, and then rushed towards Fu Yuan. The 3 men's joint forces were unstoppable, yet Fu Yuan was also being pushed back slowly by the monsters, slowly extending the distance between the 2 sides. Seeing that Ling Han and the others were all starting to accrue injuries, Fu Yuan immediately yelled loudly, "You guys go first!" If Ling Han and the others were to leave, then he would definitely lose his life. "We came together and we'll go back together." Ling Han finally didn't hold back anymore and channeled all the 8th grade seals. Instantly he became unstoppable. With the boost of nearly 1,000 times the strength, how could the 5th-tier monsters possibly be his match? Leading Xian Feng and by Maifin, Ling Han rushed towards Fu Yuan's side. He grabbed Fu Yuan and tore open space without the slightest hesitation. He made his way through it, bringing the 3 of them together with him. Xiao, the 4 of them disappeared immediately. Even if Hysteria's army also tore through space, it would be impossible to find them. Ling Han and the others traveled through space, and they soon returned to the Flaming Frost Realm. This is truly wonderful. Bai Maifin clapped his hands and laughed. He knew that Ling Han had to be proficient in some kind of escape method, or it would have been impossible for him to escape when he had broken into the base camp of Hysteria's army the first time. But Bai Maifin didn't expect it to be in such a way. "I really want to go for another round of killing," Xian Feng said, his face full of excitement. Penetrating deep into the army camp and yet being able to leave in one piece was worth remembering for a lifetime. Ling Han looked at Bai Maifin. "You really hide it too well. You have actually accommodated 2 small worlds in your body." Bai Maifin scratched his head. "I had no intention of hiding it. I initially wanted to use it when I was sparring with you, but you called a ceasefire in the end." When Ling Han thought about it, it was indeed so. "How did you do it?" Ling Han was very curious because Ling Shi and Fu Tianqing walked the same path, but they could only accommodate a single small world. Needless to say, the power of 2 dimensions had to be stronger. Ling Han quickly added, "If it's a secret, then there's no need to force yourself." Bai Maifin smiled. "It's not a big secret. All it takes is for a 7th tier to create a space in the Dantian to accommodate another small world." "Can a 3rd and 4th small world be accommodated as well?" Ling Han asked. "No." Bai Maifin shook his head. "Even if it is just 2 dimensions, not everyone can accommodate them, and one could easily be sucked dry as the dimensions grow. Perhaps one couldn't even survive past the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier level at all, and would get blown up by the power of the 2 dimensions." Ling Han shot him a glance. "You've said so much, but actually you are just showing off how amazing you are." "I'm not." Bai Maifin's face was very solemn. "Yeah, right," Xian Feng jeered. "Beat him up." Ling Han took the lead in making a move. The 3 of them joined forces. No matter how freakish Bai Maifin was, he couldn't withstand it, and was soon screaming loudly as he was getting pummeled. Chapter 2919. 2919 Disadvantage. Chapter 2919. 2919 Disadvantage. 2919 Disadvantage. As Ling Han and the rest returned to base, a commotion broke out. The first time could have been luck, but the second time was surely due to ability. Ling Han and the rest had just done a great deed and killed 2 leader beasts. Even Xian Chihu could not bring himself to taunt them any further, and instead gave them an out-of-character compliment, albeit with much difficulty. However, he still felt the need to tell Ling Han to work harder and not be satisfied with his current success, and that he should continue to work to his full potential. What he was trying to say was that Ling Han and the rest should continue to do their job of killing the leaders in Hysteria's base. Ling Han started to rest. Even though he was able to retreat in one piece after thrusting himself into enemy territory 2 consecutive times, his mind was still very stressed, and he needed to relax. Moreover, he needed to ruminate on a few things in solitude. He was very interested in the way Bai Maifin had utilized the powers of dimension. Only a person that had infused a small world inside of their body would be able to use a technique like that. If he had not accommodated a dimension inside his body, what would he use to suppress his enemies? Even though Ling Han had a boundless power of dimension inside him, it was still in its infancy. He required a significant amount of time to turn it into real dimensions. With a greater capacity, the energy needed for breakthrough was also extremely frightening. Originally, Ling Han didn't intend on picking favorites, and was going to let these powers of dimension grow together in harmony and balance. But right now, he was planning on focusing on developing 1 to 2 of these powers of dimension and let them first take shape into a real dimension. However, there was a problem he needed to deal with right now. All this while he had been using his cells as vessels to contain the limitless powers of dimension. If he were to turn this into a real dimension, he would need a suitable place to store it, wouldn't he? Normally, a heavenly venerate was only able to hold a small dimension inside of themselves, like Ling, Shi, and Fu Qianqing did. At most, they would only be able to hold one other dimension, even if they were a 7th tier. Ling Han wanted to allow 1 to 2 dimensions to develop inside of himself, and was contemplating if he should host them inside his dantian. This would be an easy maneuver for the time being, but how would he deal with it in the future when he would have to develop countless other dimensions? As such, using his dantian to store a dimension was simply a temporary measure. It was not a permanent solution. Ling Han thought about this for a long time. Ultimately, he decided not to move these powers of dimension and let them stay in their original spot. If he wanted to become a Genesis world, then he needed to be able to store a great amount of energy. 1 cell would store 1 dimension, with the cell walls acting as the dimensional barrier. The overlapping of these forces would generate limitless strength. This was merely a concept, and was not as easy to realize as it seemed. Ling Han went to look for Wally. When it came to theories, there was no one more adept than that guy. When he heard the question, Wally unabashedly asked Ling Han for 100,000 pieces of divine metal before he was willing to help solve the dilemma. As it would take a significant amount of time, and Ling Han was unable to leave the realm battlefield for too long, he decided to return first and come back again after some time. He, by Myfin, and the others went out for several more missions. No matter how prepared the opponents were, they were still unable to stop Ling Han and the rest from killing their targets. However, things got more and more dangerous each time, and the 4 of them would always return with injuries. That being said, it was already a miracle to be able to come back in one piece. Ling Han's group rose in fame and started attracting more people eager to join them, but Ling Han was no longer accepting any new members. It wasn't due to arrogance, but he simply wouldn't be able to help bring everyone back alive if their group got too big. Being in such a perilous environment constantly, Ling Han's cultivation increased at a breakneck pace. He briefly calculated that he would be able to reach the late stage of the 3rd tier in less than 1 million years, and would steadily ascend to the next stage. After a few hundred years, Hysteria's army launched another vicious assault. However, because their leaders had been killed, they didn't have many commanders, and their mighty army was not able to fully realize its battle prowess. Despite all that, the Flaming Frost army also paid a heavy price for victory and suffered a lot of casualties. Everyone was concerned that they would soon have to give up on this base with the way things were developing. Furthermore, they would have to retreat all the way back to the Flaming Frost realm and use its dimensional strength to suppress Hysteria's army. However, this result would also give Hysteria a chance to advance further. In a few short million years, it would be able to turn this area into a 2-realm passageway, resulting in the Flaming Frost army losing its strategic advantage once again. This was the equivalent of slowly killing oneself by taking poison to sate one's thirst. However, should the time actually come, they would have no choice but to do just that. Ling Han returned to the world's paramount martial academy to check out what suggestion Wally would provide him. However, seeing as the latter was still in the midst of calculations, he could only go back empty-handed. The battle raged on. Even though Ling Han's group was still making assassination attempts, Hysteria's army had greatly strengthened its defenses, making it impossible for them to kill any of their leaders. However, this was normal. Such a massive army would not have been able to cause so much destruction if they had allowed Ling Han's group to succeed every time. After several tens of thousands of years, the Flaming Frost Army's line of defense finally crumbled, and they had to retreat 500 kilometers. Their defenses continued to suffer losses, and ultimately they had no choice but to leave this battlefield, utilizing the Flaming Frost Realm's dimensional strength to suppress the enemy and help in battle. This was a major defeat, but if they had tried to force their stand, they would have only ended up losing the entire army. The higher-ups had reached a decision and started constructing a second transcendent dimension. Simply put, they were going to accelerate the progression of the war. They would evacuate all the remaining people in the high-level dimension, and then let one of the other dimensions start devouring other dimensions to create a second transcendent dimension. That way, should they lose the Flaming Frost Realm, they would still be able to retreat somewhere else and continue their battle with Hysteria from there. As such, the Flaming Frost Realm continued to resist, and by time for the new transcendent dimension to be born. Within the Flaming Frost Realm, Hysteria's army would find it difficult to advance. With the dimensional suppression, the Hysteria army's cumulative strength would be reduced by an entire level, as fifth tiers would only be able to exert the strength of a fourth tier or slightly higher. This naturally made them less of a threat and gave the Flaming Frost army the breather it needed. Using the time they had, all the heavenly venerates were trying to recover their strength, breaking through to the next cultivation level or improving their skills. In the blink of an eye, 3 million years had passed. The natural environment had changed greatly. With Hysteria's continued assault, the land that had once belonged solely to the Flaming Frost Realm now became an intersection for both realms, resulting in the Hysteria's army no longer being suppressed by the dimension. A great battle broke out once again. Having accumulated strength for several millions of years, the Hysteria army was now an unstoppable force, causing the Flaming Frost army to once again fall on the defensive. After giving up another significant part of their territory, the Flaming Frost army stood their ground and continued to resist from their new base. At this rate, they were probably able to hold out for another 100 billion years. By then, half of the Flaming Frost realm would have been devoured, and it would fall from its position as a transcendent dimension. As a high-level dimension, it would not be sufficient to resist Hysteria at all. Not to mention, the dimension would suffer massive destruction in a battle among 7th-tier heavenly venerates. This would simply help Hysteria speed up the process of destroying the Flaming Frost realm. Would 100 billion years be enough for a new, transcendent dimension to emerge from the midst of the current high-level dimensions? Some heavenly venerates were selected to move to the high-level dimensions and help accelerate the interdimensional battle between them. Finally, Ling Han received news from Wally. The latter had finished his deductions. Chapter 2920, 2920 Developing Dimensions. Chapter 2920, 2920 Developing Dimensions. 2920 Developing Dimensions. You owe me 100 million pieces of divine metal. These were Wally's first words. Ling Han looked towards him and saw that this guy was extremely weak, looking like he would collapse at the slightest breeze. The volume of these calculations is too great. At least half of my calculation units will collapse due to overload, Wally said. Ling Han nodded. All right. To say nothing of 100 million, I can even get you 1 trillion pieces. As long as the powers of dimension in his body could evolve into real dimensions, then divine metal would really be a piece of cake for him. Just look at Hysteria. It was only a dimension, yet could create countless heavenly venerates. If Ling Han could become a Genesis world himself, divine metal would naturally be no big deal. It could be created with a single thought from him. Wally stretched out a finger and tapped on Ling Han's forehead. Then it lit up, transmitting countless formulae and laws to Ling Han. Ling Han passively received these Formulian laws and analyzed them alongside his own comprehension to perfect it. "Wally, thanks a lot for this," he said seriously. "Don't think that you can renege on the payment of 100 million divine metal pieces just because you say these words," Wally asserted. Ling Han laughed loudly. Don't worry. I definitely won't cheat you. That's right. This place may no longer be safe in the future. Go to the profound negative realm. It will become a transcendent dimension in the future, replacing this place. Are you trying to send me away so you can renege on the payment?" Wally asked suspiciously, because there were already plans to abandon the Flaming Frost realm. The evacuation had naturally been carried out. Moreover, the profound negative realm would become a transcendent dimension in the future. At present, it was completely barren. All the forces wanted to settle in as soon as possible and divide the territory. Hence, it was necessary to send people over as soon as possible. Ling Han went into seclusion. Though the front lines were important, it did not matter much even if he wasn't there given the present situation. With the power of dimension suppressing the enemy troops, the Flaming Frost army had an absolute advantage. They only had to sacrifice some territory from time to time. When Ling Han used his cells to nurture the powers of dimension, that was because he thought that there would come a day when he could transform them into real dimensions. At that time, he himself would be a second Genesis world, and his battle prowess would be endless. However, how could a single cell contain an entire dimension? This would require Wally's help. In summary, it was very simple. Ling Han would build his own regulations of space so that his cells could be infinitely large. Then it would not be an impossibility for a single cell to accommodate a whole dimension. The conclusion was simple, but the process was extremely complicated. Ling Han incorporated Wally's proposal, but it was more about his own comprehension. Calculation was Wally's specialty, and Ling Han was standing at a higher position, using Wally's calculations to test out his own ideas. He was the real decision-maker and the executor of actions. This was a very long process, but Ling Han had plenty of patience. For those like Ling, nurturing a dimension in their dantian could be said to be a piece of cake. Even if they wanted to accommodate 2 dimensions at the same time like by Myfin, it could still be accomplished by a 7th-tier elite, and they themselves only needed to nurture these 2 dimensions. Ling Han was different. He was nurturing dimensions inside his cells, and there was no one he could learn from. Only Wally's calculations could be of help. Ling Han proposed a great many possibilities, and Wally eliminated the completely impossible, reducing Ling Han's workload. He sat quietly, and the heavenly venerable seals in his body all lit up, communicating with the heaven and earth, and extracting the 2 types of fundamental particles to nourish his body. In the past, all the energy would be divided evenly among the cells in his body, and the 2 fundamental powers also needed to grow. There were really too many mouths that needed to be fed, which also caused Ling Han's progress in cultivation to be astonishingly slow. Right now, Ling Han was fully focused on nurturing 2 specific cells in his body. That sped things up. How many heavenly venerable seals did he have in total? More than 200. Not only did he have a 1st-grade seal, he had gathered all the seals of the 8th and 9th grade. With their resonance, how many times could his cultivation speed increase? It should be known that this was not a battle where only one or a set of seals could take effect. Instead, however many seals he had now was the number of seals that would take effect. How many times had this increased his cultivation speed then? 1,362 times. This kind of terrifying cultivation speed was completely focused on 2 cells, nourishing those 2 dimensions. What kind of concept was that? Merely a mere 20,000 years had passed, and the power of dimension within these 2 cells was thriving and growing, each turning into a small world. How small was it? Just like the small world that Ling Han had planted in Ling Shi's body in the past. Ling Han revealed a smile, not because of the growth of these two dimensions, but rather due to formation of these dimensions. From power of dimension into a real dimension, this step was too astonishing. It had never been seen in the past or present, and perhaps it would never happen again in the future. However, this was only the beginning, the second step Ling Han had taken to become the strongest in all of history. He began to strengthen these two dimensions. Time passed quickly, and soon another 900,000 years had passed. These two dimensions had both reached the extent of a medium-level dimension. There was no way to advance any further. Ling Han himself was only a third tier, and there would be an upper limit to his physique. Ling Han's right hand turned over, turning a dimension into a projection and blasting it out. Space trembled, which was incredibly terrifying. "It can't compare to Myfin's," he said softly. This was normal. Myfin was a fourth tier, and this was an advantage in cultivation level. It couldn't be helped. If the quality is inferior, then I will use quantity to make up for it. Ling Han continued to cultivate in seclusion. He continued to cultivate to form the third and fourth dimension. Another 900,000 years passed, and he had also cultivated these two dimensions to the pinnacle of his current cultivation level. He sensed for a while and discovered that after nurturing 4 dimensions in his body, a great pressure was exerted on his physique. There was a limit to this. After reaching the limit, nurturing new dimensions would be a suicidal action. However, it was far from his limit. Ling Han went into seclusion once more. Another 8 million years later, he had turned a total of 13 powers of dimension into real dimensions, and advanced them to medium-level dimensions. This was his current limit. Now, what level can my battle prowess reach? Ling Han tore a rip into space and entered the void. If he were to train here, only then would it not cause any damage. With a single thought, the 13 dimensions in his body were projected at the same time, turning into 13 projected dimensions and exuding an incredibly terrifying pressure. "Go!" Ling Han shouted lightly and sent out the projections of the 13 dimensions. He had blasted open a hole in the energy storm in the void. Very impressive. Even Ling Han himself was given a scare. With the addition of the 8th grade combination seals, would I be able to fight even a 6th tier elite? Very quickly he shook his head. He should still fall a bit short of that. However, what if I really go all out and truly blast out the 13 dimensions? Though these were only medium-level dimensions, when the whole dimension was thrown over, and there were 13 of them at that, then what kind of concept was that? Chapter 2921. 2921 Suppression by the Dimensions. Chapter 2921. 2921 Suppression by the Dimensions. 2921 Suppression by the Dimensions. Since they already had a path of retreat, it was inevitable that the various forces would have their own plans. Since the Flaming Frost Realm could not be saved, then why would they still have to spend so much effort on it? Every time Hysteria's troops attacked, even if they were suppressed by the power of dimension, it would still lead to some wounded and even dead, which Heavenly Venerate was willing to die. Very naturally, the various forces became more and more passive in the resistance against Hysteria. On the other hand, the number of Heavenly Venerates they sent to battle at the profound negative realm was gradually increasing. For a force to be able to prosper eternally, it was definitely not something as simple as needing one or a few top-notch elites to keep watch, but rather the addition and rise of new blood was the key, and this required a massive amount of resources. Where did the resources come from? Territory, of course. The more territory they occupied, the greater their gains would naturally be. Furthermore, the profound negative realm would be upgraded from a high-level dimension to a transcendent dimension. In between, there would be massive changes in the heaven and earth, and observing the changes in the dimensional core at close quarters would be greatly beneficial to any Heavenly Venerate. Moreover, after upgrading, the profound negative realm would also produce a great number of natural treasures. In fact, even treasures that would be useful to heavenly venerates would appear. For these reasons, even heavenly venerates couldn't maintain their composure. They had to quickly stake a claim to the territory. But even if Ling Han or those around him worked hard, it would be useless. There were too many hysteria troops. Even if it was Lin Yulian or the like, the result of taking them head-on would definitely be the latter being blasted into dust. In the end, even the 6th-tier elites spoke up, strictly controlling the number of heavenly venerates that entered the profound negative realm. They indeed needed heavenly venerates to help speed up the devouring process of the profound negative realm. But if the flaming frost realm fell because of this and the profound negative realm had not matured yet, that would be great trouble. Since the 6 tiers had spoken up, the situation became slightly better. However, there were still forces that secretly arranged for heavenly venerates to go to the profound negative realm. It was just that they were not as brazen as before, and their numbers were also controlled. Ling Han returned to the front lines and fought against the Hysteria army together with his family, brothers, and friends. He moved out alone and carried out a decapitation mission. Right now, his strength had further advanced, and added with the fact that he had formed real dimensions, he was filled with confidence. Fu Yuan and the others wanted to go together with him, but Ling Han rejected their offer. If he was alone, he could come and go as he pleased. He arrived at the enemy camp and did not hide his tracks. In any case, after so many attacks, Hysteria's army was already extremely heavily guarded. No matter how he disguised himself, it would be useless. There was only a simple word for it: kill. Ling Han charged into the enemy camp with his battle prowess on full throttle, unleashing a great massacre. The Hysteria army immediately rioted, and countless attacks poured towards Ling Han. Wang, wang, wang. The powers of dimension in Ling Han's body channeled, like a millstone, dispersing the majority of the attacks that were fired at him. However, the numbers were really too high and too concentrated, and there were still a great many attacks that could not be dispersed. After a round of attacks, Ling Han almost threw up blood. Fuck, it had only been 10 million years or so since they had last fought, and the attacks of these guys had actually become so fierce. Ling Han was sure that if it were not for the fact that he had the powers of dimension in his body to disperse attacks, even a 6th-tier elite would probably throw up blood and be injured under the combined barrage of so many attacks. It wasn't that Ling Han was more powerful than a 6th tier, but rather that when faced with a large number of attacks, the power of dimension had an advantage in dispersing them. On the other hand, if a 6th tier were to directly attack Ling Han, then even if the power of dimension absorbed 50% of the attack, it would still cause serious injury to Ling Han. In fact, it might even kill him directly. Ling Han released a battle cry, unleashed the 9th grade combination seals, and charged towards the enemy's leader. He was invincible, and no monster could stop him. The leader monsters were already prepared. The moment Ling Han entered, they would retreat. No matter what, they had to maintain an absolute distance from Ling Han. On the other hand, a tidal wave of monsters filled the whole, using their bodies of flesh and blood to block Ling Han. Though Ling Han was aggressive, there were really too many enemies. Furthermore, with thousands of attacks blasting at the same time, it also made Ling Han feel like he was under a mountain of pressure, and he thought of retreating. I haven't tried out my new move yet, Ling Han thought. A large part of the reason why he had come here was because he wanted to test out the might of those 13 dimensions in actual battle. Go! He shouted lightly, and the projection of a dimension immediately shot out. It was infinitely enlarged, and a frightening pressure instantly descended. At least tens of thousands of nearby monsters were affected and couldn't help but bow. It was not that they wanted to submit to Ling Han, but rather that the pressure was too great, forcing them to bow. Pung, pung, pung. However, these monsters were extremely ruthless, so how could they possibly compromise so easily? A great many monsters that had spare energy immediately moved, blasting towards that dimension. A 3rd-tier heavenly venerate could destroy a low-level dimension. A 5th-tier heavenly venerate could destroy a medium-level dimension. and this dimension that Ling Han projected was only medium level. So how could it withstand the combined attacks of innumerable fifth-tier heavenly venerates? Very soon, multiple cracks appeared, and then it turned into innumerable pieces with a bang. Ling Han was completely unconcerned. He had already taken advantage of the opening to cover a large distance. Then, with a wave of his right hand, dimensional projections shot out again, and this time the number had reached as many as 3. Boom! Even fifth-tier monsters were affected. Even if they did not bow, they could feel their bodies become heavier. Ling Han continued to advance, and he was already getting closer and closer to his target. The monsters all attacked at the same time, and the projections of the 3 dimensions very soon exploded. However, when Ling Han released another 5 projections of dimensions, he had already reached the target monster. He shot out a punch, bringing with it an amplification of more than 200 times in power. Pung, it was only a single punch, and the target monster was instantly crushed into dust. Ling Han turned around without hesitation and locked down on the second target monster. Would he be able to kill another? Though he was presently very relaxed, that was because the dimensions in his body were showing their might, suppressing many monsters. But after the projections of the dimensions were destroyed, they would need time to reform. He had already used up 9 dimensions, and only 4 remained. Let's give it a try. Ling Han charged over again. The projections of the 4 dimensions were channeled at the same time, suppressing innumerable monsters, while he took advantage of the opening to madly charge towards the second leader monster. He unleashed his full power, channeling the 8th grade seals. His power increased by close to 1,000 times, and his speed also received an astonishing increase. When the 4 dimensions were destroyed, Ling Han had also arrived in front of his target. As usual, he threw out a punch. Pum! The monster was killed without a doubt. Amidst an army of thousands, it was a piece of cake for him to take the enemy commander's head. Ling Han laughed loudly, his heroic spirit soaring. But in the next instant he had already torn open a rip into the void and directly fled. The remaining 13 dimensions had already been used up. If he didn't leave now, what else was he waiting for? Was he waiting to be beaten up? He entered into the void and couldn't help but feel rueful. No wonder Zhou Heng, Lin Xiaoyang, and the others all said that the best path should be to place dimensions inside one's body. It was indeed awesome. Chapter 2922. 2922 Betrayed? Chapter 2922. 2922 Betrayed. 2922 Betrayed. The terror of dimensions lay in their size. When a dimension crashed down, it was enough to impede tens of thousands of heavenly venerates of the same level at the same time. If that was not the case, what would qualify Ling Han to kill the enemy leader in the midst of an army of 10,000 on his own? To say nothing of him, even Lin Yulian and Xan Chihu couldn't do it. I only have 13 dimensions. What if I can have 130 dimensions? 1,300 dimensions. Ling Han thought to himself. He couldn't help but be captivated and aspire for this future. At that time, even if he fell into a siege of Hysteria's army, there would be no need for him to enter into the void. He only had to release one dimensional projection after another, and he would be able to suppress these monsters to the point that they could only sprawl out in submission. Even the projections were like this. So what about the dimension itself? Just how many times would its might increase? This could not be easily attempted, because if the projection had exploded, so be it. It could be used again after a few months or years. However, the dimension was different. This was the foundation. If the foundation was completely gone, how could there be a second time? Thus, this is my trump card. Unless absolutely necessary, I will definitely not use it, Ling Han thought. On the other hand, I still have to improve my cultivation level as soon as possible and increase my capacity to accommodate dimensions. He was just about to tear a rip into the void and return when a feeling of extreme unease suddenly rose up in him. Schwa! In the void, a whip-like shadow whipped over. It was Hysteria. This was still not Hysteria's main body, yet gave Ling Han an incredibly realistic feeling, oppressing him to the point that even breathing was difficult for him. He suddenly had an instinctive feeling that this was Hysteria using the power of dimension to suppress him. Ling Han could use the dimensional projections to suppress others, so why couldn't Hysteria do the same? Not only could it could even do it better than Ling Han. It could do it 100 times better, 1,000 times better than he could. The two sides were not even on the same level at all. Though it looked like a whip-like shadow was whipping over, there was a dimensional projection within. It was equivalent to a transcendent dimension suppressing him. What kind of concept was that? In the past, though Hysteria had also attacked Ling Han before, it actually had not had any killing intent. Its purpose had only been to awaken him. However, this strike was completely different. It was intended to kill him. It was clear that Hysteria didn't have any intention to save Ling Han. Since he had already betrayed Hysteria, it wouldn't hesitate to erase him. The number one elite in the world had moved, even if it was only a doppelganger who could block it. It would have to be a 6th tier at least, right? Ling Han did not hesitate in the slightest. Wang. The 13 dimensions in his body were all unleashed, forming a shield in front of him. Even 5th tier elites would be affected by the dimensional projections. Now, however, not only were 13 dimensions appearing at the same time, but they were also dimensions proper. The might of these dimensions had increased by at least 10 times, and the shield that they formed was most likely impenetrable. Pung. However, with Hysteria's attack, the 13 dimensions instantly exploded into pieces. They were only able to stall it for a sliver of time. This bought Ling Han an instant, and even made him throw up blood madly. The dimensions crumbled, and he, as the main body, was naturally implicated as well. However, he did not even pause, and used this instant to tear a rip into space and return to the Genesis world. Wah! He began to spit out large mouthfuls of blood, and his face instantly became incredibly pale. His whole person was lying on the ground, and he did not want to move a single muscle. The dimensions that he had painstakingly nurtured had been obliterated. This caused too much damage to him. He cast his gaze internally. Thankfully, though the dimensions had been blown apart, there was still a sliver of residual power left behind. This could still allow him to slowly restore the dimensions, but everything would have to start from the beginning again. His hard work of the last 10 million years was completely wasted. Damn it! Ling Han sat up in a cross-legged position and drew out a great herb. This was a recovery-type great herb. Crack! He took a bite and tried his best to recover as soon as possible. After a whole 3 years, he had finally recovered a little. He stopped and began to ponder. How did Hysteria find me? I've already erased the mark it left in my body. If it could still find me, why didn't it appear after I have traveled through the void so many times before? This time has been so coincidental. This is practically an ambush set up for me in the void. Could it be that someone leaked my whereabouts? Ling Han was shocked. If that was not the case, how could there be such a coincidence? But who had leaked the secret? It should be known that there were over 100 undercover agents in the Flaming Frost Realm, so could it be one of them? However, not many people knew that he was going to battle this time. Aside from the Empress and the other women, the Rain Emperor, the Black Donkey, and the Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable, no one else knew. Additionally, there were also his comrades, by Mython, Fuyuan, and Xianfeng. If there were any more, it would be Lin Yolian, Xian Chihu, and Wu Haoyang, the 3 commanders-in-chief. Whatever mission Ling Han and his group wanted to carry out on the battlefield, they would definitely have to make a report. If there was an undercover agent, he would have to be among these people. Ling Han immediately excluded the Empress, the Black Donkey, and the others. They had walked with him all the way here, and he had absolute trust in them. Then that would be among these 6 people: Bai Maifin, Fu Yuan, Xian Feng, Lin Yolian, Xan Chihu, and Wu Haoyang. However, Lin Yolian and the other 2 greatest prodigies of all eternity were descendants of 7th tiers, so the possibility of them becoming Hysteria's subordinates was close to 0. Of course, it was also possible that Xan Chihu collaborated with Hysteria just to get rid of Ling Han. Thus, the most likely candidates were these 3 people: Xan Chihu, Fu Yuan, and Xian Feng. Ling Han did not want to doubt his own comrades. Hence, he was more inclined to believe that it was Xan Chihu who had leaked the secret. For the sake of killing me, this person is really willing to do anything, even disregarding his bottom line? Ling Han thought. He continued to recover from his injuries, and after another few decades, he finally recovered. However, the dimensions that had been destroyed would need to be nurtured again and reformed. This was tens of millions of years of hard cultivation. He returned to the realm battlefield, and had not even had the chance to talk about his own matters when he received an earth-shattering piece of news. A change had taken place in that group of lost primitive dimensions. The Empress and the others had not left yet, and had been waiting for Ling Han to return. What happened? Ling Han asked. We're not sure either, but it's said to be extremely shocking. Let's take a look. Ling Han and the others set out. After merely over a dozen years, they had once again arrived at the group of lost primitive dimensions. There doesn't seem to be any change. Ling Han swept a glance over. This place was just like how it had been in the past. It was just that countless ruins and devastation had been left behind because veins of or had been excavated. Pum! Just as he said this, a pillar of light rose up in the distance, breaking through the barrier between dimensions and causing an explosion in the void. Ling Han was instantly shocked. The energy in this pillar of light is too terrifying. It has reached the 6th tier at least. Hunyo cocked her head and said, could it be that this is an energy storm that has rushed out of the 9th and 10th dimension? Was this possible? The Empress nodded. At present, the ground layer here has been excavated, forming a great many passageways. It would not be strange for the energy storm to be able to go through and exit. 1. A terrifying aura swept past, spreading out for millions and millions of kilometers. Chapter 2923. 2923, a 7th tier emerges. Chapter 2923. 2923, a 7th tier emerges. 2923, a 7th tier emerges. Ling Han, the Empress, and Hunyo all felt their chests become muffled and almost lost control of their power, toppling down from the skies. The 3 of them were astounded. Just what kind of terrifying aura was this that it could actually have such a terrifying effect on them? However, this aura had disappeared after a single sweep. So this is the change. This aura is too terrifying. It's at least a 6th tier elite, but this is clearly a dead land. So where did a 6th tier elite come from? Don't tell me that there are still living 6th tier elites buried underneath. Ling Han thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, that's not very possible. Senior Zhou and the others have already explored the 9th dimension, and all the veins of or should have been swept clean, and it is impossible for anything to be left behind. If there's a 6th tier elite hidden in the 10th dimension, even Senior Zhou and the others can't enter there. So how can he release his aura? Don't tell me that there are still 7th tier elites sleeping here, and they're about to awaken. If this was true, then this would be a really huge matter. The 7th tier was considered the strongest in the world, indestructible and undying, all right. One had died, but Ling Han had absolutely no idea how he had been killed. If a 7th tier were to appear, then if they did evil, the whole Genesis world would suffer. The party observed here and discovered that that aura from before appeared again after 67 days. It was incredibly terrifying. However, the next time, only 66 days had passed, and this aura appeared once more. Next, it was 65 days, 64 days, and 63 days, and the intervals became shorter and shorter, causing Ling Han and the others to feel even more uneasy. If this was an elite slumbering, then this aura was becoming more and more active. The time for his emergence should be drawing closer and closer. They ventured deep into the 8th dimension and observed it from a close distance. However, they could only sense the vastness and majesty of this aura, yet still couldn't find its source. After a few days, Zhou Heng, as well as 3 other 6th-tier heavenly venerates, came out of the 9th dimension. Senior Zhou. Ling Han hurriedly went up to greet him. Have you discovered anything? The source comes from the 10th level, or perhaps even the dimension below it, Zhou Heng said solemnly. Underneath this, it's extremely likely that a living 7th-tier elite has been buried. Previously, a 7th tier had also been unearthed from raw stone, but that was a corpse, and now it was a living 7th tier. The significance was completely different. Brother Zhou, will you ask your master to make a trip here? A 6th-tier elite beside the masked. He was Rong Tianyu, an ally of Lin Xiaoyang, Zhou Heng, and Chu Hao. Zhou Heng nodded. This matter is too important. Even if master does not come personally, he will at least have to send out a doppelganger. No one thought that this was an exaggerated measure. The emergence of a new 7th-tier elite was too shocking. More and more people arrived. Zhou Heng and the other 6 tiers even made arrangements to set up a base here because if that newly emerged 7th-tier elite bore malicious intent, he should be suppressed. Even if he couldn't be killed, he would be eternally sealed here. 6 tiers couldn't do it, so Lin Luo, Bai Fan, Xan Fu, and the other 7 tiers all sent out a doppelganger, which meant that the greatest power of heavenly venerates of the entire Genesis world was gathered here. As for Hysteria's troops, forget about them for now. Under the suppression of the dimension, the defenders only had to leave behind a small number of troops, and they would be able to resist. This place was too crucial. 13 days, 12 days that aura appeared more and more frequently. Finally, it appeared a few times in a single day, and the ground began to tremble, as if all the dimensions were about to collapse. 7th-tier elites possessed such power. He's about to emerge, Zhou Heng murmured, frowning deeply. Though there were presently as many as 76 tiers here, and there were also at least 5 doppelgangers of 7th-tier elites, they might still be unable to suppress a real 7th-tier elite. No one was certain of that. A 7th tier was too strong. Having fused 6 fundamental powers together, he was definitely invincible. Only a 7th tier would be able to stand against another 7th tier. This was an ironclad rule. Pum, pum, pum. When this aura fluctuated like the breathing of an ordinary person, drum-like sounds rang out, causing pain to everyone's ears. Some people were even bleeding from their 7 apertures. It should be known that this was the 8th dimension. Those that could come here all had battle prowess on par with 5th-tier elites. Even such elites would be shaken to the point of bleeding from his 7 apertures, and it was merely because of a sound. This was far too terrifying. Xiao, 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 xiao. 5 figures appeared, all of them exuding boundless light. Their appearance could not be clearly seen at all, but the moment they appeared, that drumbeat immediately became smaller and could no longer cause any effect. These were the doppelgangers of 5 7th-tier elites. Ling Han rubbed his nose. He wasn't bleeding so terribly from his 7 apertures, but it was inevitable that he would have a nosebleed. He couldn't help but feel shocked. Even the 7th-tier elites had been mobilized, so was there really a 7th-tier elite about to appear? Would the secrets of this lost primitive dimension that had been sealed for countless years finally be unraveled? Pum! A pillar of light rose into the sky, and the terrifying aura instantly soared madly like a tidal wave. The 5 7th-tier elites all took a few steps back and actually looked like they were outmatched. Could it be that this 7th tier that had not emerged was strong to this extent? Of course not. It was because these 5 supreme beings were only doppelgangers. No matter how strong doppelgangers were, how could they compare to the original? Sigh. A long sigh rang out in everyone's mind. After a long dream, eternity will pass. Reminiscing the mortal world, epochs pass like dreams. A figure slowly walked out from underground, calm and composed. However, when he appeared in the center of the masses, no one could see his true appearance. What is it? Putting on such a grand display, are you planning to kill me? This person's eyes swept over the surroundings, and he couldn't help but laugh loudly. His voice was like thunder, shaking a great many people to the point that they stumbled and could not stand steadily no matter how hard they tried. So this was a 7th-tier ultimate elite. He was too strong, having such might with just a laugh. If he really attacked, how could even 6th-tier elites withstand his strike? How should I address you, sir? A 7th-tier elite's doppelganger asked, not knowing who he really was. At present, even 6th tiers were not qualified to speak. They could only play the role of spectators on the sidelines. Me. The newly emerged 7th tier chuckled. He stretched out his arms and drew on the fundamental power of heaven and earth. A smile appeared on his face. As expected, the void is indestructible, and life is reborn from death. Sir, who exactly are you? Another 7th-tier elite's doppelganger asked. Oh, if I don't say anything, could it be that you guys plan to compel me? The newly born 7th tier chuckled, completely unconcerned. 7th-tier elites were undying and indestructible, and even against hysteria, they didn't need to fear. Whom did they need to give face to? Old friends, all of you, wake up! The 7th tier shouted lightly, and his palm delivered a palm strike onto the ground. Boom! Not only was this dimension trembling violently, but the 7th and 6th dimensions were also trembling under the transmission of power. Moreover, the power was still spreading upwards. Similarly, the power was also spreading downwards, reaching the 9th dimension, the 10th dimension, and even further downwards. After only a short while, for extremely terrifying auras spread out. Chapter 2924. 2924, A World-Shaking Secret. Chapter 2924. 2924, A World-Shaking Secret. 2924, A World-Shaking Secret. Everyone inhaled sharply at the same time. Could it be that there was more than one 7th tier buried here? Pum, pum, pum. Beams of light continued to shoot out from the ground. 1, 2, 3, for there were a total of 4 beams. Then, for figures walked out of the pillars of light. They were all enshrouded in boundless light, and their appearance could not be seen clearly. However, every single person was exuding a great aura that could crush the heavens, and even the doppelgangers of those 5 7th-tier elites were no match, appearing to pale in comparison. 7th-tier elites, there were actually 5 7th-tier elites. Hiss! How were they supposed to suppress this? To say nothing of the fact that there were only 5 7th-tier doppelgangers. Even if Lin Luo, by Fan Lin Luo, and the other 7th tiers personally came here, they would not be able to accomplish this at all. Old friends, we finally meet again. The 7th-tier elite, who was the first to emerge, exclaimed with emotion. I am not the slightest bit happy to see an old, shameless rascal like you. I am not the slightest bit happy at all, a 7th tier immediately said. Hee, how long are you two going to bicker for? A third 7th tier elite said with a smile. He looked at the doppelgangers of Lin Luo and the others. Friends, may I ask if extermination has already appeared? Extermination? Lin Luo and the other 7th tier, heavenly venerates, were all confused. What the heck was that? Oh, the third 7th tier elite revealed an expression of realization, though no one could see it. He laughed loudly. My title is Chong Yen. These 4 old friends are Big Dipper, Shatter Mountains, Mysterious Feather, and Half Moon. He pointed at the 4 newly emerged 7th tiers one by one, paused, and gave everyone a buffer time. Then he said, I know what you guys want to ask, and that is the origins of the 5 of us old geezers. We do not come from this world or this era. Seeing everyone's confused expression, he continued, to put it simply, before this world was born, we already existed. Fuck. Hearing these words, everyone felt their scalp go numb with shock. Were these 5 7th tiers monsters? They were even older than Genesis world itself. But the problem was, who would be able to cultivate to the heavenly venerable tier without the support of dimensions? Could it be that these 5 people were 7th tiers from the moment they were born? Though there is no accurate accounting, the Genesis world has existed for about 3,000 epochs. Lin Luo said, Friend, what you mean is that before the Genesis world appeared, there was another world, and you guys were living in that world. Clever! The heavenly venerate, Big Dipper, clapped his hands. The place that you all are standing now is the world that we used to live in. These overlapping dimensions were actually another Genesis world. Heavens! Hiss! It was no wonder that the dimensions overlapped with each other, which was extremely inconceivable. According to deductions, at least a few hundred 7th tier elites would have to act to be able to make 2 dimensions overlap each other. However, for this kind of practically endless overlapping of dimensions, it was certain that no matter how many 7th tier elites there were, they would not be able to accomplish this. However, the Genesis world itself was like this, so that would explain things. Then, how did the world of our friends become like this? Bai Fan asked. This place was in ruins, completely destroyed and devastated. Could it be that a conflict had erupted among the 7th tiers, causing the whole Genesis world to collapse? That's because of extermination. Heavenly Venerate, Chong Yen sighed. This is an indescribably powerful being. Not only has it cultivated to the 7th tier, it has even manifested into a dimension and started the realm war, swallowing countless dimensions. What? Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. Wasn't this referring to hysteria? And then Lin Luo asked in a very serious manner. Everyone's heart clenched. The answer from Heavenly Venerate Chong Yen might be the key to dealing with hysteria, because these 5 great Heavenly Venerates were still alive. But extermination was no longer wreaking havoc. Obviously they had won. Afterwards, Heavenly Venerate Mysterious Feather shook his head. Let's call it Genesis world as well for now. We fought against extermination together with the Heavenly Venerates of all the dimensions, but still we could only retreat slowly. The transcendent dimensions were continuously falling. Though we created new transcendent dimensions, extermination also became stronger and stronger. The speed of our creation was already unable to keep up with the rate at which it was devouring. Heavenly Venerate Half Moon continued. In the end, we were forced to fight a battle to the death. We detonated the cores of all dimensions and launched the final and strongest attack against extermination. Though this destroyed extermination, our world has also completely collapsed, which has also had a massive impact on us. Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountain said. He stretched out a finger and pointed. Our world was originally the same as yours, and only became like this after the collapse. According to our deductions, the Genesis world was nurtured by the void. As expected, after countless epochs, a new Genesis world has appeared again, Heavenly Venerate Chongyen said. As everyone listened, they all felt their scalp go numb. As it turned out, they had been born in a new world after the old world had been destroyed, and before that, a being like Hysteria had almost devoured the old Genesis world. Ling Han thought of that 7th tier's ancient corpse. Could it be that he had been killed by the power of the Genesis world's collapse? Otherwise, what other power could kill a 7th tier? Previously, extermination had been so strong, but hadn't it also been blown apart? Lin Luo obviously thought of this as well and began, "We once excavated an ancient 7th tier's corpse." No wonder. It was said that 7th tier was immortal and indestructible, but with the destruction of the Genesis world as the price, this burst of attack would have already surpassed the limits of 7th tier. "Friends, though we do not have extermination, we do have hysteria," Xen Fu said. He briefly introduced hysteria to them. "This is extermination." Chongyan and the other heavenly venerates exclaimed simultaneously. As expected, extermination is too strong, and even an explosion of the dimensional core was unable to kill it. Heavenly Venerate Big Dipper said, the boundless light flickering all over his body and showing the intense fluctuations of his emotions. "Hysteria is extermination." Everyone was stunned. If that was really the case, that would be too terrifying. Sacrifice the entire Genesis world to unleash the strongest attack. Yet that is still unable to kill it. Just look at Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand, who is also a 7th tier, yet was deader than dead. Was hysteria indestructible? No. Lin Luo said, "If hysteria is extermination, then it was also born over 100 epochs ago. Why had it also been so late? It must have also suffered severe damage in the previous world's destruction. Who knows, there might have only been a tiny bit of remnant soul left behind, and that is why it needed so many years to recover, and only then did it manage to make a comeback." That's right. Bai Fan, Xan Fu, and the other 7th tiers all nodded. Even Chong Yen and the other veteran 7th tiers expressed their agreement. Otherwise, hysteria wouldn't have needed to endure for so many years. It could have directly swallowed the Genesis world when it had been first born, and there wouldn't have been so much trouble now. Even so, could it be that it wants to destroy the world again and die with it? Chapter 2925 2925 Son of Destiny. Chapter 2925 2925 Son of Destiny. 2925 Son of Destiny. Destroy the Genesis world again. Everyone shook their head. There would probably be no one aside from the undying and indestructible 7th tier 7th elites that could escape alive when the dimensions crumbled. That's right, when detonating the cores of all dimensions, aside from 7th tiers, there's no one who would be able to survive that. Heavenly Venerate Chong Yen nodded. Furthermore, since extermination has fallen for it once, I'm afraid it won't repeat the same mistake. After a round of conversation, everyone also found out that though these 5 7th tiers were the strongest in their era, under the impact of the Genesis world's destruction, they had also suffered heavy injuries and were forced to enter into a state of slumber. They felt as if eternity had passed, and only now did they awaken and re-emerge in the world. Both sides were the strongest in the world, but hysteria had awakened before them, and had suffered an equivalent of a burst of attack caused by the entire Genesis world exploding. With such a comparison, hysteria's terrifyingness was fully displayed. It couldn't be killed no matter what, and it was also powerful to the extreme. How could they not be afraid? "Looks like we have to work together," Heavenly Venerate Chongyen said. N. Lin Luo Bai Fan and the other 7th tier elites nodded. Their interests were the same now, and even if they couldn't defeat hysteria with the addition of 5 7th tier supreme elites, at least their strength would be greatly boosted, and they would be able to last for a longer time. "Please return with us, friends," Xan Fu said. All right. Everyone returned to the Flaming Frost realm together. With the intervention of 7th tiers, their speed was naturally astonishingly great. In a few years' time, they returned to the Flaming Frost realm. Chongyan and the other supreme elites all sensed the power of this dimension. They weren't from this dimension, and in fact weren't even from this Genesis world. Thus, they needed to once again grasp the unique power of dimension here. For a 7th tier, having one more or one less such power wouldn't have much effect, but it was always good to strengthen oneself, even if it was only a bit. "My 5 friends, shall we now go to see some old friends?" Lin Luo asked with a smile. "Before that, we have one more thing to do," Heavenly Venerate Chongyen said. The 5 7th-tier elites moved at the same time, but there were specks of light flickering on their palms, and the whole sky was filled with them. They were both beautiful and stunning. The light of life!" Lin Luo and the other 7th tiers all exclaimed. "It contains the mark of life and can nurture new life." Heavenly Venerate Chongyen nodded and said, "The Genesis world was destroyed, and aside from 7th tiers who are undying and indestructible, no other life form could possibly survive. Only the mark of life could be preserved in the mind of a 7th tier, and only then would there be a chance for rebirth. For a living being, the most important thing was memory. In other words, it was the mark of life. The body itself was actually not all that important. Now, the 7th-tier elites extracted the boundless power of heaven and earth to construct a new bodies for these marks of life. Life was the manifestation of regulations. The heavenly venerable tier was superior to regulations, so creating life was naturally a small matter. However, without the mark of life, the life created by a heavenly venerate would also have no intelligence, and would need a long time to slowly evolve and form. Witnessed by countless people, the power of heaven and earth gathered on the spots of light. One after another, living beings came from nothing, forming out of thin air. There were humanoid shapes, as well as those of beasts and birds. When they took form, they were at the Celestial King tier. There were First Heaven Celestial Kings, and there were also Ninth Heaven Celestial Kings. Heavenly Venerable tier surpasses regulations, but because we are too powerful, we cannot be reformed by regulations. Hence, the light of life cannot be left behind so that we can obtain rebirth, either, Heavenly Venerate Chongyen said calmly, seemingly feeling very regretful. Everyone felt the same. If the heavenly venerates of the other Genesis world could be brought over, then their strength would undoubtedly increase greatly. Though we are all 7th tiers, the light of life that we can preserve is also limited, Heavenly Venerate Half Moon said. However, these are all the greatest prodigies of all eternity. The majority of them could have long since become heavenly venerates, but for the sake of preserving some chance of life, they have not broken through all this while. Throughout such a long time, their souls have also been cultivating and improving. As long as they possess a real body, they would be able to experience a great breakthrough in a short period of time. Boom! Just like an explanatory note for his words, a Ninth Heaven Celestial King actually advanced to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier easily and was instantly targeted by the heaven and earth. Lightning struck madly, yet he easily dispersed it. This was too terrifying, to say nothing of how long he had been accumulating power at the Ninth Heaven for. This could only bring him appreciation. He did not have the slightest understanding of the flaming frost realm at all. Ling Han also looked over and saw that this was a young man that looked like a god. He had long golden hair, exuded a soft luster, and was indescribably handsome. And he himself was exuding a kind of power, a grand power, the power of the world, as if he was the son of destiny. Merely standing there, he had become the center of the heaven and earth, attracting everyone's attention. Feng Wuding was the strongest prodigy of our world. Moreover, when the Genesis world collapsed, an inheritance mark flew out and landed on Feng Wuding's light of life. Heavenly Venerate Chongyen said with a hint of envy. A 7th tier was already standing at the pinnacle of the world, truly invincible, undying, and indestructible. Yet he was actually envious of Feng Wuding, which showed how amazing this great luck was. But when one thought about it, it made sense. Obtaining the inheritance mark of the Genesis world, what kind of concept was that? If we want to completely eliminate extermination, the present hysteria, Feng Wuding is the key, Heavenly Venerate Half Moon said. As long as he matures, he'll possess the great power of the Genesis world, and perhaps this can really be realized. When everyone looked at Feng Wuding again, their gazes had changed completely. Envy, jealousy, hate, all these emotions filled their eyes. At this point, let me give you a warning first, Heavenly Venerate, Big Dipper suddenly said, his voice cold and sharp. The inheritance mark of the Genesis world cannot be snatched. If anyone wants to kill Feng Wuding and snatch his inheritance mark, it is destined to be a pointless effort. They would be destroying the only chance to destroy Hysteria. And I will also crush that person's bones into dust. There is no need for a 7th tier Heavenly Venerate to threaten anyone at all who would not revere him. But Heavenly Venerate Big Dipper had still deliberately said this, which showed just how important Feng Wuding was. Everyone nodded internally. This mark should indeed not be taken away. Otherwise, why would a 7th tier elite not take it for themselves? Friends, let's go and meet Hysteria. We haven't seen it for so many years, and we still miss it quite a bit, Heavenly Venerate Shatter Mountain said. The 5 of them had already completed the creation of life, and there were instantly more than 10,000 celestial kings here. Zhou Heng, make the necessary arrangements, Lin Luo said to Zhou Heng. He paused for a moment before continuing. Hysteria has sent something, and is currently launching an attack. We need to return to our positions and resist with all our might. Understood, Master. Zhou Heng nodded respectfully. Xiao. The 10 7th tier elites left, leaving behind those who had yet to regain their breath. The amount of information that they had received was really too great, and they needed time to digest it. Chapter 29-26, 29-26 Feng Wuding. Chapter 29-26, 29-26 Feng Wuding. 29-26 Feng Wuding. Before their world, there had actually been another world. Had there not been over 10,000 celestial kings born here, everyone would have assumed it had just been a dream. Come with me, Zhou Heng said to Feng Wuding and the other celestial kings from the previous Genesis world. No, it's better to come with me, another 6th tier elite said. Stepping out from the crowd, he added, If you come with me, I will nurture you all with as many resources as you desire. Are you saying I can't promise them that? Another 6th tier elite asked. What was the most important thing in this world? The strongest elites, as well as fresh recruits with unlimited potential. All of them had originated from the previous Genesis world, and being selected meant that they were all the cream of the crop. While maybe not all of them would become a 7th tier, getting to 5th tier was no problem at all. This was especially the case for Feng Wuding, the strongest prodigy in the previous Genesis world. He had received the inheritance from the previous Genesis world, and was even likely to surpass the 7th tier in the future. Just how important was this? If any force were to add these geniuses to their ranks, they would definitely be able to become the strongest faction in the entire Genesis world in the future. As such, even 6th tier elites were all desperately vying for talent. One after the other, the 6th tier elites showed their sincerity as they extended the olive branch to the potential recruits. The celestial kings were tempted. The other party was all 6th tier elites after all. No matter if it was the previous Genesis world or the current one, they were all close to the strongest level possible. As such, the celestial kings quickly made their decisions. However, the most sought-after talent, Feng Wuding, remained quiet. It was not that no one had invited him. On the contrary, a prodigy from the previous Genesis world, like him, was surely more coveted than the rest. However, he remained unperturbed and didn't deign to make his decision too lightly. Evidently, he was still testing the waters and wanted to see which side would be able to give him the better offer. However, Lin Xiaoyang, Zhou Heng, and Chu Hao didn't participate in this competition for fresh talent. Even though each faction needed new blood to bolster their forces, the same rules didn't apply to 7th tier forces. It was because 7th tiers were completely indestructible and never had to worry about the day they would wilt and die. Lin Luo, was the perfect example of standing guard for eternity. Even if the Genesis world were to be destroyed, he had a high chance of surviving it. Why the heck would he ever need any fresh recruits then? Moreover, Zhou Heng, Chu Hao, and even Lin Yulian had a high chance of reaching the 7th tier. Thus, they didn't need to go through so much trouble. Ultimately, Feng Wuding decided to join the World Alliance where Yu Borong was at. Ling Han was shocked as Yu Borong had a blood debt with him. Would this mean that Ling Han and Feng Wuding would become enemies from now on? Ling Han was filled with excitement at the prospect of battling such a genius and seeing how high his battle prowess was. After the recruitment, all the heavenly venerates returned to the realm battlefield. Battling hysteria was the main priority after all. Ling Han went back to his daily life of either cultivating or killing on the battlefield. He wanted to take on another decapitation mission and figure out which of the people around him was the spy. However, he didn't want to take the risk. What if he were to get ambushed by hysteria? This time he wasn't sure he would be able to escape with his life so easily. As long as the spy was not found, he could not rest. Because they had just retreated to the Flaming Frost realm and had the advantage of dimensional suppression, they were able to buy themselves around 2 million to 3 million years of time. Everyone was making the most of that time by intensely cultivating. The geniuses from the previous Genesis world were truly extraordinary. In just a little over 100,000 years, at least 1,000 new heavenly venerates had cropped up among them. However, Feng Wuding was still, surprisingly, a pseudo-heavenly venerate. This strongest prodigy was also blessed by the heavens. Previously, he had managed to gain the upper hand with a show of strength. Why couldn't he do the same now? When he found out about this, Ling Han said, "I think this is what makes Feng Wuding so terrifying. To a genius like him, the question isn't about becoming a heavenly venerate, but rather how can he become the strongest heavenly venerate?" The Empress replied, "You're saying that he didn't advance to become a heavenly venerate in order to accumulate strength." Another several hundred thousands of years had passed. More and more geniuses from the previous Genesis world had become heavenly venerates. After all, the reason they were chosen was because their potential was among the highest there was, and with them accumulating strength over countless epochs, it was not surprising to see them soar so quickly. Moreover, the various great forces spared no expense at cultivating these new recruits. Back when they had been unearthing raw stones, they had been able to obtain many great herbs. While some of them had been used up, a large portion had been saved up. These were ultimately used to cultivate these young talents. In just the span of 2 million years, the quickest among them had already risen up to the 3rd tier, with many following behind. It was truly astonishing. At this moment, Feng Wuding finally broke through and became a 1st tier. The second he challenged a 3rd tier heavenly venerate to a battle, and managed to end the battle with a draw. Everyone was completely flabbergasted by the result. To be able to battle someone 2 entire levels higher than him, Feng Wuding was too powerful. Even Lin Yulian and Xian Chihu couldn't compare. "I think Ling Han can do that too," someone mentioned Ling Han. How can Ling Han possibly compare with Feng Wuding? Feng Wuding was not only the strongest prodigy from the last Genesis world, he even managed to get its inheritance. He's already this powerful after stepping into the heavenly venerable tier. He is sure to become much stronger in the future. That's right. He is the heir of the Genesis world and the son of destiny. In the future, he will definitely reach greater heights than the 7th tier. Everyone concluded that Ling Han was no match for Feng Wuding. This had been decided by fate. When Ling Han caught wind of the rumors, he simply gave a light laugh. He wouldn't try to bully someone weaker. If Feng Wuding was to catch up to him in terms of cultivation level, then he wouldn't mind sparring a little. On the other hand, Feng Wuding simply scoffed. "Oh, there was someone else who can battle someone 2 levels higher?" He smiled. "Once I enter the 3rd tier, I'll take him as my servant." His words were full of contempt towards Ling Han, which was then repeated verbatim by a servant. Soon, the news spread across the realm battlefield. Hun Yo was completely furious. She wanted to go find Feng Wuding and give him a good beating. However, the latter was in the midst of cultivation somewhere else, so she couldn't seek him out at all. Truth be told, aside from Feng Wuding, all the other geniuses from the previous Genesis world were arrogant and thought little of this generation's prodigies. Even though both sides had not had any major conflicts yet, there were plenty of minor scuffles. A day would come when these minor scuffles would escalate into a full-blown battle. In the next 1,000,000 years, Feng Wuding would display his terrifying potential. Not only did he rush up to 3rd tier, he was just inches away from becoming a 4th tier. The day had also finally come for him to enter the realm battlefield. The entire base erupted with excitement when they heard the news. One was the strongest prodigy from the previous Genesis world, while the other was the unbeatable monster from the current generation. Now that the two of them were about to come face to face, which of them would be the stronger one? Everyone was filled with anticipation towards this battle. Chapter 29-27 29-27 Venting Anger. Chapter 29-27 29-27 Venting Anger. 29-27 Venting Anger. Ling Han was hated by many, but everyone had to admit that this guy was incomparably freakish. When he was a 3rd tier, he already possessed 5th tier battle prowess, and he could come and go as he liked through Hysteria's base, killing countless enemies. Feng Wuding, a prodigy from the Genesis world of the last era, had even obtained the inheritance of that Genesis world. Although no one knew what this so-called inheritance was, Feng Wuding was definitely extremely powerful. When he was in the 3rd tier, he, too, could match a 5th tier, which was sufficient to prove that his strength wasn't inferior to Ling Han's. Previously, the two of them were already at each other's throats, provoking each other from afar. It was believed that the first thing Feng Wuding would do upon arriving at the realm battlefield was to challenge Ling Han to prove that he was the strongest prodigy in history. However, unexpectedly, despite Feng Wuding having already arrived at the base camp for 3 days, he didn't seem to have the slightest intention of challenging Ling Han. Everyone was dumbfounded. What was going on here? Yet someone had guessed Feng Wuding's thoughts and said, "This must have been deliberate on Feng Wuding's part. He does not take Ling Han seriously and disdains to challenge him at all." Was that indeed the case? "Ling Han, that brat looks down on you so much. Can you really tolerate that?" The large black dog came over to find Ling Han. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "So what about it? Should I go and challenge him?" "Go on." The large black dog nodded. "That brat is so arrogant, so how can we not teach him a lesson?" Ling Han shook his head. He did it on purpose. He wants to elevate his own status. So why should I help him to accomplish his goal? The large black dog thought about it and agreed. Ling Han's reputation was earned through battle and had long since received public acknowledgement. Despite Feng Wuding's starting point being very high, he didn't have any astonishing battle merits after all. If Ling Han was to challenge him first, then Feng Wuding would be able to make a move, which would naturally raise his reputation to the next level. He is truly too shameless. He actually wants to use my little Han's name to ascend to a higher position. No way! Grandpa Dog is going to teach him a lesson. The large black dog ran off angrily. The two supreme prodigies did not exchange blows, but there was a considerable number of skirmishes between the Ling Alliance and the World Alliance. Whether it was at the realm battlefield or in the profound negative realm, a considerable number of battles had erupted between both sides, with each side sustaining victories and losses. However, the conflict between the two major forces became more and more intense. Not only did the conflicts become more frequent, but more and more people got involved. It wasn't until one incident that finally made Ling Han furious. Ling Shi and Fu Tianqing were not at the realm battlefield. The couple was responsible for expanding the territory in the profound negative realm, but they were ambushed by the World Alliance, resulting in the two of them being severely injured and almost unable to return. Family and friends were Ling Han's bottom line. Previously, he had been negotiable in all aspects and treated this kind of conflict as a kind of training for everyone. But now the actions of the World Alliance had gone too far. Ling Han, the Empress, and Hu Niu both looked at Ling Han. "Let's go." Ling Han stood up, his expression dark. "Where are we going?" "To the World Alliance." The three of them walked out of the house and headed in the direction of the World Alliance. Despite this being the realm battlefield, the various great forces still divided their territory. One would be here, while the other would be over there. Usually, every force would mind their own business and stay in their own lane. If anyone was to rashly barge into the territory of another force, the lightest punishment would be being banished and kicked out, while the heavy punishment would be getting thoroughly beaten. There was nothing else that could be done. Previously, in order to contend for heavenly venerable seals, an irrecoverable barrier had already formed among the great heavenly venerates. How could they treat each other as brothers just because they were now fighting side by side? Although close to 90% of the heavenly venerates had gathered here, it was completely silent beneath the city wall. The majority of them were cultivating in their own residences, trying to make themselves a little bit stronger in preparation for the next wave of attack from Hysteria's army. Perhaps one would be able to survive just because one became a wee bit stronger. The city wall was very long, but with the pace of heavenly venerates, it only took a while to close the distance. In under 30 minutes, the trio had already arrived at the territory of the World Alliance. Ling Han stopped in his tracks and did not continue forward. He turned around. On one side of the city wall, there was a large group of buildings, which was the territory marked by the World Alliance. Ling Han strode forwards, heading towards the group of buildings. Immediately, someone shouted, "Halt!" Had they walked by the city wall, no one would have cared, but it was different here. This was the territory that had already been demarcated by the World Alliance. Ling Han looked over in the man's direction. Woo! That person immediately clutched at his chest with one hand, and blood was dripping from all his apertures. This man was only a ninth heaven celestial king, so how could he possibly withstand the might of his gaze? If it were not for the fact that Ling Han did not want to kill him, this guy would have already died. Even so, he had also been severely injured. Without a few 100 million years of rest, it would be impossible for him to recover. Ling Han continued to walk forward, but immediately 3 more people jumped out and appeared in front of him. However, these 3 people did not make a move because they knew who Ling Han was. They were definitely no match for him. Ling Han, how dare you barge into the territory of the World Alliance? A second-tier heavenly venerate called out. Ling Han looked towards this heavenly venerate and did not speak, but a frightening aura spread out, bearing an indescribable pressure on that person. Ah! The second tier screamed involuntarily and staggered a few steps backwards, also bleeding from all his apertures, having been severely injured. In front of Ling Han, what difference was there between a second tier and a ninth heaven celestial king? Both would be unable to withstand even a single strike. This astounded the other 2 people. Not everyone had personally witnessed Ling Han's powerful battle prowess, and they kept feeling that the rumors were slightly exaggerated. How could a third tier be as powerful as this? Now that they had seen it with their own eyes, they realized that Ling Han was indeed freakish, even surpassing the rumors. They didn't dare to say anything else. Who would want to suffer for nothing? In any case, they were no match for Ling Han, and since they were no match for him, what need was there for them to seek their own suffering? Pung! Pung! However, Ling Han had no intention of letting them off the hook. With a punch, the 2 of them were instantly sent flying through the air, knocking down who knew how many walls along the way. The 2 of them were extremely depressed. They had not spoken out of turn, So why did they still need to suffer a blow? Didn't you come here to find Feng Wuding? Why did you make a move on them? They couldn't get up, as they were already severely injured by Ling Han's strike. Ling Han's expression was cold. He had not come today to spar with Feng Wuding and see who was the strongest prodigy in history. He had come to beat someone up to vent his anger. Xiao, xiao, xiao! More heavenly venerates leaped out, surrounding Ling Han, yet none of them made a move. Even in the World Alliance, there were not many fifth-tier heavenly venerates. The rest were mediocre, so how could they possibly stop Ling Han? Hence, not a single one of them sought their own humiliation. Ling Han clenched his right hand into a fist and threw out a punch. What? You actually dare to take the initiative to attack? How arrogant! Everyone was exclaiming in shock. They had not thought that Ling Han would be so arrogant and would be so overbearing even when he had barged into the territory of the World Alliance. They all moved to parry, but even if there were several dozen heavenly venerates, taking this blow head-on still forced them all backwards. Why was it so difficult to advance to the fifth tier? This was because one would have surpassed the fourth tier by who knew how many times in taking this step. When Ling Han threw out a punch, his fist was unstoppable. Chapter 2928. 2928. Who can stop me? Chapter 2928. 2928. Who can stop me? 2928. Who can stop me? Ling Han, as one of the greatest prodigies of all time, why are you bullying someone weaker? A voice resounded, and in that instant everyone was on edge. It was the mystic snake, heavenly venerate, a fifth tier. Ling Han narrowed his eyes at the middle-aged man, slowly approaching with a smile as the crowd dispersed. The massive image of a snake over several hundred meters long hovered behind him. The sight of it was terrifying. Boom! Without saying another word, Ling Han struck out with his fist, condensing his energy into a massive fist that hurtled towards the mystic snake, heavenly venerate. The mystic snake, heavenly venerate, was furious as he thought, "This is too much. How could you just attack without warning? Have you no dignity? We both possess a fifth tier's combat prowess and are almost at its peak, yet we're still having to fight like we're street thugs." Despite what he thought, he still had to meet Ling Han's blow. As one of the 9 strongest individuals of the Alliance, he of all people could not back down. Pum! He managed to parry Ling Han's punch, but quickly lost balance and fell back over 10 steps. Everyone from the World Alliance was stunned by the turn of events. The mystic snake, heavenly venerate, was a middle-stage, fifth tier, and with neither side using any heavenly venerable seals or secret techniques, and only fighting with their original strength, he had actually been pushed back. It was clear that Ling Han possessed abnormal strength for a third tier. "You've gone too far!" the mystic snake, heavenly venerate, barked. Activating his heavenly venerable seal, his power instantly surged by 40 times. Boom! His aura became even more formidable as the giant snake image behind him started to take on an almost physical appearance as though it was coming to life. He charged out towards Ling Han and punched with his right fist. Boom! The giant snake image also rushed forth viciously to bite down on Ling Han. Whoa! A seal was also shining on the giant snake, giving it an astonishing aura. This was a secret technique, and it was where the mystic snake, heavenly venerate, got his name. Ling Han was unperturbed. All secret techniques were just different applications of the same power. If one's power was great enough, they could overcome anything. Simple, direct, and overbearing. Ling Han punched back in retaliation, activating his own heavenly venerable seal simultaneously. Pum! As their fists collided, the mystic snake, heavenly venerate, spat out fresh blood and was sent flying. "A first-grade seal," he yelled. His battle prowess wasn't low, but the difference in their heavenly venerable seals was too great. Xiao! Ling Han rushed forth in pursuit of the mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate. He was planning on completely putting down every single person from the World Alliance. Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han launched successive punches, completely suppressing the mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate. Soon the latter was covered in injuries. Everyone was completely flabbergasted. Initially, they had a lot of confidence in Feng Wuding. However, if even a fifth tier was suffering like this, was there anyone else who could stop Ling Han? Stop! A deep voice resounded, and soon 8 figures appeared. These were the other 8 fifth tiers from the World Alliance stationed here. When they say how badly the mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate, was getting beaten, they had to step in. Otherwise, the World Alliance was going to become a laughingstock. The mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate, was relieved. If the 9 of them were to join forces, they were sure to be able to take Ling Han down. However, Ling Han pretended not to hear anything and continued to pummel him. Pung, pung, pung. The mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate, continued to suffer massive injuries to the point where he couldn't help but cry out in pain. It was utterly embarrassing. Ling Han, you've gone too far. The other 8 fifth tiers were furious and struck out simultaneously. All those who could become Heavenly Venerates were prodigies in their own right. Moreover, reaching the 5th tier was not something anyone could do even if they had several epochs worth of time. With 9 such powerful individuals joining forces, even any 5th tier would probably feel frightened. However, Ling Han was not worried. So what if there were 9 of them? He quickly activated a dimensional projection to suppress them. After so many years, he had not only managed to develop all 13 dimensions, even his physique had improved further now because of his reaching late-stage 3rd tier, and he was able to contain up to 19 different dimensions. He was confident he could take the mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate, and the rest by surprise and make them suffer if he were to release all 19 dimensions from the start. However, it was better not to reveal all his cards too early. It was more than enough to activate a single dimensional projection. Even if it was just a projection, it was more than terrifying enough. The mystic snake, Heavenly Venerate, and the rest were all groaning and looked to be in pain. Dimension suppression. Destroy it. All 9 Heavenly Venerates shouted as they joined forces. Pung, pung, pung. As they bombarded the projection with attacks, cracks quickly appeared on its surface, and it was ultimately destroyed. However, Ling Han took advantage of the opening and launched another attack. Upon supplementing his fists of fury with the 1st grade seal, his attack was nigh unstoppable. With a single punch, he sent one of the 5th tiers flying. In the time it took for the dimensional projection to be destroyed, Ling Han had already sent 5 Heavenly Venerates flying. Gasp! Everyone from the World Alliance was flabbergasted. It was no wonder Ling Han was able to come and go as he pleased within Hysteria's army base. His abilities were too powerful. Who among the 5th tier was able to stop him? Could Feng Wuding do it? They were all confident at first, but now they were beginning to doubt it. Pa, pa, pa! The sound of clapping hands echoed as a golden-haired man walked over. Like an emperor, there was a boundless aura about him, giving him a presence that would make others prostrate themselves before him. It was Feng Wuding, the strongest prodigy from the Genesis world of the last era. You've got some skills, said Feng Wuding. With an indifferent expression, he continued. Ling Han, you've finally come to challenge me. Challenge? Bullsh *T. He was here to deliver a beating. With the support of a 1st grade seal, Ling Han's battle prowess was terrifying. As indifferent as he might seem, not even Feng Wuding was able to stand idle against it. He said angrily, Don't assume you're the only one with a 1st grade seal. An ancient and powerful aura began to circulate Feng Wuding as he activated his own 1st grade seal, increasing his power by 80 times. He met Ling Han head-on, completely unafraid. There was no arguing that Feng Wuding was an extraordinary existence in his own right. A few 100 million years ago, he was still a ninth heaven celestial king. Now he had not only reached the third tier, but was at its peak, surpassing Ling Han in terms of cultivation level. Not to mention, he had the support of a first-grade seal. However, his battle prowess was still just roughly the same as Ling Han's. What? Feng Wuding couldn't accept what happened. His cultivation level was slightly higher, but his power still ended up in a draw against Ling Han's. Impossible! Impossible! He was the strongest prodigy in the Genesis world of the last era, and enjoyed the benefits entitled to that position all to himself. There was none who could compare to him. Yet, how was he unable to best Ling Han? Even people like Lin Yolian and Xan Chihu could only overcome an opponent who was a single cultivation level higher than themselves, and they were called the greatest prodigies of all eternity. However, compared to him, they were just average prodigies. How was Ling Han able to be this strong? Could it be that he extracted too many powers of dimension, enabling him to gain the upper hand in strength? This was not impossible. Normally, extracting the power of dimension from roughly 100 dimensions was enough for one to fight against a prodigy who had created a dimension within their body, even if they hadn't reached the third tier. If they extracted upwards of 1,000 dimensions, they could even put up a fight against a fifth tier. That must be the case. Chapter 2929. 2929, Who is the Chosen One? Chapter 2929. 2929, Who is the Chosen One? 2929, Who is the Chosen One? Feng Wuding's confidence was reignited. He released a battle cry. It was all right. His advantage lay in the fact that he had more power behind him. At present, he was only slightly inferior to Ling Han. When he advanced to the fourth tier, he would then be able to surpass Ling Han. At the very least, they would be evenly matched. When he advanced to the fifth tier, he would be able to suppress Ling Han in terms of raw power. "Take a finger from me," he said balefully. He gave a tap with his finger, and endless brilliance condensed at the tip of his finger, pressing down towards Ling Han. This attack was extremely terrifying, as if even the defense formed by a sixth tier could be easily shattered. Ling Han's gaze became focused. This tap was indeed extraordinary, condensing all of Feng Wuding's power into a single point. The destructive power naturally increased by tons. This was a very simple thing to say, and anyone could easily think of it, but the power of Heavenly Venerable Tier was already incredibly condensed, and to compress it further to a single point was really too difficult to accomplish. Feng Wuding being able to do this was indeed very impressive. However, could he become the strongest prodigy of the Genesis world of the last era and even obtain the inheritance of Genesis world just because of this? Ling Han shook his head. This was definitely not enough. He condensed fists of fury and charged ahead to block Feng Wuding's attack. Pu, 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 Pu. After a few consecutive attacks, multiple bloody marks instantly appeared on Ling Han's fists. Those were marks that had been forcefully created, but Feng Wuding did not seem to have the upper hand, either, because his finger had twisted strangely. With the head-on clash, the bones in his finger had also been dislocated, and there were even some fractures in his bones. Feng Wuding finally withdrew the last shred of his pride and looked at Ling Han solemnly. Even the Eternal Destruction finger could do nothing against this opponent. This finger technique was something that he had comprehended through countless epochs of deep slumber and was integrated with some kind of mystical power of the Genesis world. In the battle against Ling Han, he actually couldn't gain even the slightest bit of upper hand. He was filled with extreme jealousy. Even if he was confident that he would be able to crush Ling Han when he advanced to the fourth tier or fifth tier, he actually did not manage to suppress Ling Han in a battle of equal cultivation levels. Instead, he was at a slight disadvantage, which actually made him extremely jealous and resentful. "Humph, then let's have a competition based on background," he declared. The two of them exchanged blows, and after more than an hour, The first-grade seal that Ling Han had augmented his power with had already finished releasing its energy. Immediately it dimmed. However, because Feng Wuding had moved later, this seal of his could be channeled for another 15 minutes. Ling Han smiled calmly. Whoa! All the ninth-grade seals lit up, instantly boosting his battle prowess by more than 200 times. Feng Wuding was greatly shocked. He never thought that not only did Ling Han possess a first-grade seal, he also had a complete set of ninth-grade seals. The might of this far surpassed a first-grade seal, and under the strike of 3 consecutive punches, Feng Wuding was throwing up blood. "Don't think that you've won," he roared in fury. Won. For seals lit up on his body at the same time, and a terrifying aura spread out. His battle prowess soared, instantly reaching the point where he could rival Ling Han. Pum! The two of them exchanged blows, yet it was hard to decide who was the stronger one between them. Ling Han's eyes involuntarily narrowed. These were actually another 4 first-grade seals, and they were combination seals at that. Let's battle it out. The two of them continued to exchange blows, but their raw power was more or less equal, and the heavenly venerable seals were also more or less equal in amplification, so it couldn't be decided who was the stronger one between them no matter what. Humph! Feng Wuding's eyes sharpened, and his right hand tapped towards Ling Han. Whoa! A shadow appeared, turning into a world. Dimensional projection. This wasn't strange. Top-notch prodigies would definitely nurture dimensions in their bodies. This was a sustainable path, unlike with the Empress, who was extremely strong at first, but she would slowly be caught up with by others as her cultivation level increased. Boom! The dimensional dimension pressed down. Though its power wasn't extremely overbearing, it was still a dimension after all, so it brought overwhelming pressure. Ling Han also channeled a dimensional projection to meet this oncoming attack. Pum! Although the collision of 2 dimensions wasn't exactly real, with the condensed power of the heavenly venerates, it was half real and half solid, and therefore still extremely terrifying. Under the clash of such violent impact, both of them were knocked backwards, but they immediately came charging back and fought fiercely. "There's more!" Feng Wuding roared. He actually channeled another dimensional projection. Ling Han was not surprised. As long as a 7th tier lent a helping hand, a supreme prodigy would be able to nurture 2 dimensions. Ling Han wasn't inferior either and channeled a 2nd dimension. Pum! The 4 dimensions collided, and the ensuing shockwave was naturally even more terrifying. What? These 2 people can actually nurture 2 dimensions inside their bodies? This. No wonder these 2 people can battle those surpassing their cultivation level. I heard that even those incredibly freakish prodigies could only accommodate a single dimension. How impressive indeed! Everyone was exclaiming in shock. As the commotion caused by the battle was too great, it had also attracted people from other forces. In fact, Lin Yolian, Xian Chihu, and Wu Haoyang had all been alerted. However, the 3 of them did not step out to stop the battle. They, too, wanted to know just how strong Feng Wuding, the son of destiny of the Genesis world of the last arrows. Did you think this was my limit? Feng Wuding sneered. Wang, he launched another dimensional projection. The 3rd one. Everyone inhaled sharply. Feng Wuding actually had a 3rd dimension. This time, even Lin Yulian and the others, as well as Bai Meifan, who had rushed over later, revealed shocked expressions. They knew very well that even if a 7th tier elite lent a helping hand, that would only allow outstanding prodigies like them to possess a 2nd dimension. 3 dimensions, this was unprecedented, and perhaps it would never happen again. Ha 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 ha, Ling Han, how are you going to match that? Feng Wuding laughed loudly. Wasn't being suppressed by 3 dimensions impressive enough? Everyone was rendered speechless. Feng Wuding was too impressive indeed, as expected of the son of destiny of the Genesis world of the last era. Hold on, someone suddenly said. This was a fifth-tier heavenly venerate of the World Alliance. His voice was actually a little shaky. Don't forget, when Ling Han and I were fighting, he has already used a dimensional projection once. Of course, dimensional projections could be used again and again, but the problem was that the dimensional projection previously had already been destroyed by them. If Ling Han wanted to condense it again, that was definitely not something that could be done in a short while. Since Ling Han had already channeled 2-dimensional projections, then added with the previous one hiss, the heavenly venerates of the World Alliance were all stunned. Ling Han wasn't the slightest bit inferior and also possessed 3 dimensions. If Feng Wuding was the son of destiny of the Genesis world of the last era, then was Ling Han the chosen one of the present Genesis world. Ling Han smiled calmly as he channeled another dimensional projection. Pooh! Bai Meifan instantly spluttered. He possessed 2 dimensions, and this was something that he had always been proud of. However, he had never seen Ling Han channel a dimensional projection before, and thought that Ling Han had walked the path of accommodating power of dimensions in his body. Now that Ling Han was stronger than him, he would definitely surpass him in the future. It had never occurred to him that not only did Ling Han walk the same path as him, but he even had to look up to him. 3 dimensions. The members of the World Alliance were even more stunned because they knew that this was actually the 4th dimensional projection that Ling Han was unleashing. A monster, he was truly a monster. Chapter 2930. 2930 Spar My A *S. Chapter 2930. 2930 Spar My A *S. 2930 Spar My A *S. The clash between the 2 great prodigies was a great eye-opener. It turned out that the number of dimensions that the body of a heavenly venerate could contain was not 2, but could reach as many as 3. Feng Wuding was also stunned. He had not expected that there would be another that could accomplish the same feat aside from himself. "Do you think that this is my limit?" he shouted loudly, and the 4th dimensional projection suppressed down. Phut! 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 At this, everyone's mouth was gaping as they were completely rendered speechless. For dimensions, how was this done? Meanwhile, Ling Han smiled faintly. For dimensions! And this just barely had the feeling of a son of destiny. However, compared with the tens of thousands of infant dimensions inside his body, this was no big deal. Limited by the cultivation level, even Ling Han couldn't possess millions and millions of dimensions. Right now, he only possessed 19 dimensions. The problem was, what was Feng Wuding's limit? Ling Han was a little curious, but was completely unconcerned. He had not come to spar with him, but merely to deliver a beating. Boom! In a single breath, he channeled another 5-dimensional projections. Pooh! Everyone spluttered. There was nothing wrong with their eyes, right? How could they have seen an absolutely impossible feat? 8 dimensions. Feng Wuding was instantly suppressed and continuously forced backwards. Even his back was bent under the pressure. The suppression from 8 dimensions was too strong, and even he could not bear it. But in the next instant he roared furiously, and a majestic power surged out of his body. One. A total of 10 dimensions appeared around him. This was his true trump card, 10 dimensions. Unprecedented in history, a supreme miracle. Everyone was also dumbfounded. Ling Han was already overwhelmingly strong, possessing 8 dimensions, which they didn't even dare to imagine. However, Feng Wuding was actually even more freakish, advancing another 2 steps further from the impossible. This was the son of destiny. Suppress! Feng Wuding charged over with the projections of 10 dimensions, his might unmatched. At the level of 5th-tier battle prowess, who could stop him? Ling Han was still silent. He merely clenched his right fist. One. Another 3-dimensional projections were activated, instantly turning the tables. Everyone couldn't wrap their head around this. So what if they were heavenly venerates? This had instantly broken the iron rule that had existed throughout eternity, so who could still remain calm? 11 dimensions were you trying to defy the heavens? The members of the World Alliance were even more stunned because they knew that the number of dimensions that Ling Han truly possessed would have to be increased by 1. Feng Wuding was also rendered speechless. He was favored by the heavens, and there were actually more than 10 dimensions that could be easily accommodated in his body. However, limited by his cultivation level, he presently could only allow 10 of these dimensions to grow. Though Ling Han only had 1 more dimension than he did, he was still overwhelmed, and there was no way he could catch up. Ling Han penetrated deeply, bringing the 11 dimensions and firmly suppressing Feng Wuding. Everyone was dumbfounded and then felt rueful. A great many people felt a sense of pride. After all, Ling Han was one of their own. Feng Wuding was a remnant of the Genesis world from the last era, and no matter what, he should be considered an outsider. If it were not for hysteria, they would even have come to blows. After all, the ancient newcomers could also be considered as invaders. Feng Wuding humphed and didn't say anything else. He simply continued to exchange blows with Ling Han. He indeed had 1 less dimension than Ling Han for suppression, but he was only slightly suppressed, but it was not to the extent that he would be overwhelmed. Hence, he could still bear it. He was defiant. He had placed his hopes of victory on exhausting Ling Han's heavenly venerable seals, which would result in his battle prowess dropping drastically. And he still had another trump card. His battle prowess was outmatched, so it was inevitable that he would be hit a few times, causing him to feel great pain, and a strong sense of humiliation rose up in him. He was a supreme prodigy that could surpass his cultivation level and defeat a superior opponent, but now, in a battle of equals, he was actually still being suppressed. However, 2 hours were about to pass. As expected, the light of the seals on Ling Han's body dimmed one after another, and his battle prowess also ebbed considerably. Haha, what is the meaning of background? This is what background means. Feng Wuding laughed loudly. Boom! Another 3 seals lit up on his body. They, too, were supreme and could crush all life. First-grade seals. Heavens! Not only did he have 8 first-grade seals, he could even form 2 sets of combination seals. 1 set of 3 and another set of 4. This allowed his battle prowess to increase by more than 170 times. He still maintained the standard of crushing all with 5th-tier battle prowess. Now, how was Ling Han supposed to block this attack? Everyone shook their head. Who would have thought that Feng Wuding would actually have mastered 3 first-grade seals, and could even combine them? This kind of battle prowess could sweep aside all with 5th-tier battle prowess. Boom! Feng Wuding's palm struck towards Ling Han. Ling Han let out a battle cry, and the 8th-grade seals lit up one after another. However, he controlled them and only channeled half of them so that the increase in battle prowess was only about 500 times. But was 500 times not enough? Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han completely overwhelmed Feng Wuding, throwing furious punches one after another and blasting Feng Wuding like he was a scarecrow. He could only be sent flying continuously. Feng Wuding was completely stupefied. The reason why he could possess 8 first-grade seals was because he had obtained them through the inheritance of Genesis world from the last era, but he had already expended 1 whole set of Ling Han's 9th-grade combination seals, and he was actually still overwhelmed by Ling Han. He could not accept this. Perhaps he couldn't accept this fact, but it couldn't change the fact that Ling Han's battle prowess was overwhelming. Feng Wuding could only be pummeled. I forfeit, he declared reluctantly, but he had even less desire to have Ling Han continue pummeling him like this. His arrogance did not diminish, and he thought that this was only because his cultivation level was still too low, so he could not make full use of his full advantage as the son of destiny. For example, there were a total of 100 dimensional seeds in his body, but now he had only developed 10 of them into dimensions. As long as his cultivation level increased, his ability to battle above his cultivation level could at least be maintained, if not improved. Moreover, everyone knew that once the cultivation level increased, the ability to battle above his cultivation level would definitely decline. One declined, while the other maintained this ability. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, who would win? Revenge was a dish best served cold. A man who knew when to yield and when not to yield was a true man. Pum! However, he had just finished his words when a heavy punch landed on his face, causing his nose to bleed. You! Feng Wooding roared loudly. He had already admitted defeat. So why didn't Ling Han stop? Who would spar like this? Pum! He suffered another punch. You have gone too far. Feng Wooding was filled with fury. Do you think I have come to spar with you? Ling Han finally spoke. Is that not the case? Wrong. I have come to deliver a beating. There is no difference between you and those nobodies, so don't think too highly of yourself, Ling Han said coldly as he continued to throw punches. What *T, son of destiny. Trash. These words were too hurtful. Feng Wooding wanted to die. He had a high opinion of himself, and thought that he was the son of destiny. No one could compare to him. However, Ling Han didn't take him seriously at all, and ignored him completely. This kind of disdain was something that he could not tolerate. Chapter 2931. 2931 Return. Chapter 2931. 2931 Return. 2931 Return. Yet Ling Han did not care. Just like he had said, he had only come to deliver a beating. Who cared if Feng Wooding admitted defeat, or if he was pleased or not? There was only one word for it, thrash. In full public, Feng Wooding, the son of destiny of the Genesis world of the last era, was thrashed madly and completely humiliated. Everyone was rueful. The Genesis world of the previous era ultimately represented the past. In this era, they would still have to depend on the son of destiny of this Genesis world. And this person, from the look of things, was Ling Han. Ling Han showed no mercy and thrashed all the members of the World Alliance, inflicting serious injuries. Then he emptied out all of their spatial tools, and only then did he stop. He obtained a considerable number of great herbs, which were the benefits bestowed by the World Alliance. These heavenly venerates had been saving them up, and in the end they had all benefited Ling Han. To dare ambush my daughter, you guys are really courting death. Ling Han said menacingly. This was the realm battlefield and killing was forbidden. If not for that, these people would have long since died. The members of the World Alliance could only groan in pain. There should be no one with 5th-tier battle prowess capable of defeating Ling Han, unless a 6th Tai made a move. However, because the environment here had evolved, even if a 6th tier came, his cultivation level would still be suppressed. He would probably only be delivering himself up to die, and would not be a match for Ling Han at all. So awe-inspiring. Xian Chi-Hu said coldly, Ling Han, don't you know that private battles are forbidden here? Ling Han turned to look at him, and felt that this so-called greatest prodigy of all eternity was extremely disgusting. Ling Han could not even be bothered to speak nonsense with him. When he had enough strength, he would just directly beat him till the latter burst. The coldness in his expression caused Xian Chi-Hu to fly into a rage, and he immediately stepped out. Ling Han, you dare to look down on me. He moved and pressed out his right palm. Boom! 6th-tier power blazed out. This power was too great. Ling Han could not possibly match it. But before he even retreated, Lin Yulian had already moved and stood in front of him. Her delicate hand waved lightly and dispersed this blow from Xian Chi-Hu. Move aside. Xian Chi-Hu's gaze was menacing. Lin Yulian had tender features, but her expression was extremely determined as she said, Brother Xian, enough is enough. What do you mean by enough is enough? Xian Chi-Hu laughed loudly. His figure shot out and charged towards Ling Han. You've gone too far. Lin Yulian waved a sleeve, stepping forward to meet Xian Chi-Hu's attack. The two greatest prodigies of all eternity began a fierce clash, both unleashing their full battle prowess. Hong long long. The heaven and earth trembled. Thankfully, this place had already become the realm battlefield. Ordinary people would have long since evacuated. Otherwise, if they fought like this, who knew how many ordinary people would suffer? Even so, Ling Han and the other elites with fifth-tier battle prowess had no choice but to retreat as well. The aftermath was extremely terrifying, and there was no need for them to face it head-on. After fighting for half a day, Exan Chihu finally stopped. As fellow greatest prodigies of all eternity, Exan Chihu couldn't do anything to Lin Yulian, and Lin Yulian couldn't do anything to him either. Unless they really fought with their lives on the line, it would be impossible to determine the victor even if they fought for 100 million years. Exan Chihu looked menacingly at Ling Han. He did not hide the killing intent in his eyes at all. Previously, he had kept it hidden and used a decapitation operation to lay a trap for Ling Han. But looking at his present expression, if he had a chance to make a move, he would kill Ling Han without hesitation. Ling Han was fearless as he looked into Exan Chihu's eyes. Worst come to worst, he could just tear a rip into the void and leave. As long as he advanced to the fourth tier, he would be able to completely match Exan Chihu, and if he became a fifth tier, beating up Exan Chihu would definitely be as easy as a father beating his son. There was a ball of anger in Ling Han's heart. Exan Chihu could be so unrestrained. But wasn't it all because he had a higher cultivation level and greater strength? I want to become stronger. I want to become even stronger. Ling Han clenched his fists and shouted in his heart. An incredibly desperate need for strength rose up in him. Everyone gradually left. Because unity had long since crumbled, the rules of the realm battlefield weren't so strict anymore. As long as no one was killed, no one would pursue the matter. Thus, the matter of Ling Han destroying the World Alliance was also set aside in confusion. Actually, there were only a few people and forces that really wanted to pursue the matter with Ling Han. The majority still hoped to see Ling Han mature. Ling Han had only collected some interest this time. He knew that the cause of the trouble lay with Yu Borong, who wanted to avenge the death of his son, and that was why he had deliberately targeted the Ling Alliance. This debt would be remembered. Time passed quietly, and as the environment of the realm battlefield became more and more neutral, Hysteria's army attacked again, setting up camp in the distance, ready to launch a fierce attack at any time. However, because the timing and location were still leaning in favor of the Flaming Frost Realm army, Hysteria's army chose to stay put. Just at this moment, news came again from the Genesis world of the last era. Previously, hadn't there been people who stayed there, wanting to find any raw stones that they had missed? Not too long ago, someone had actually entered into the 10th dimension. Was this a 7th tier? Of course, that was impossible. This was only a 3rd tier, but how had he managed to enter the 10th dimension? As it turned out, a spatial overlap had appeared in this group of dimensions. It was not the kind of compression from top to bottom, but rather like the realm battlefield in the past. When one was walking in the 2nd spatial level, who knew one might pass through a cave and arrive at the 5th level or the 7th spatial level. That 3rd tier had entered a passageway in the 4th dimension, and then discovered that he had come to the 10th dimension, or at least it was the 10th level, because this place had not been excavated before. Ultimately, the reason should be related to the emergence of Heavenly Venerate Chong Yen and the other 7th tiers. They were too strong, which affected the structure of this Genesis world. It was absolutely possible because this Genesis world was already dead, so it naturally couldn't withstand the power of 7th tier. When this news spread out, everyone was naturally moved. When the primitive dimension had appeared, it had greatly increased the overall strength of the heavenly venerable tier elites. However, limited by their strength, even 6th tier elites would not be able to set foot from the 10th dimension onwards. And now, a special passageway had actually been discovered. The camp instantly became restless. Who would still be in the mood to sit here? Not long after, a decree came from the sixth-tier elites, permitting a portion of heavenly venerates to venture into the last era Genesis world for exploration, because this would be able to increase the overall strength of heavenly venerable tier. However, the choice of candidates was strictly regulated. A total of over 100 people were chosen and were able to enter into the Genesis world of the last era. Ling Han was also fortunate enough to be given a place. Additionally, supreme prodigies like Xian Chihu, Wu Haoyang, Feng Wuding, and so on were also on the list. However, Lin Yulian was excluded. She would wait for Ling Han and the others to return and take turns with them. Otherwise, if all the powerful figures left, then the Hysteria army would still be unstoppable should they launch an attack, the suppression of heaven and earth notwithstanding. It should be known that there were definitely spies of Hysteria among them, and the truth definitely couldn't be concealed. Among those who had good relations with Ling Han, only Bai Meifan was also included in this batch. The two of them immediately set out, heading towards Genesis world of the last era, which was in the void. They only had 100,000 years, and then they would have to return. Otherwise, they would be dealt with as traitors. Chapter 2932. 2932 I am an ultimate grandmaster. Chapter 2932. 2932 I am an ultimate grandmaster. 2932 I am an ultimate grandmaster. Ling Han brought by Meifan and traversed through the void. He was constantly vigilant. The moment he discovered any trace of Hysteria, he would immediately return to the Genesis world. He definitely wouldn't have any thoughts of getting lucky. This time it was only Ling Han and Bai Meifan, because there was a strict limit on the number of people. The Empress, Hunyao, and the others had all stayed behind in the realm battlefield. They could not possibly follow him here willfully. Fortunately, Hysteria didn't appear. Although Ling Han was cautious, the two safely and smoothly arrived at the Genesis world of the last era. After learning the truth, Ling Han and Bai Meifan had different feelings when they set foot on this piece of land again. This place had once been glorious and had once represented everything. However, because of Hysteria, it had now become ruins and could only float in the void forever. Say, do you think there's another Genesis world of the era before last? Bai Meifan suddenly asked. Ling Han was surprised. Your imagination is too active, isn't it? That may not be the case. Perhaps Hysteria has originated from an even more ancient era, and even the Genesis world of the last era was just like us. Bai Meifan insisted on this point of view. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh in spite of himself. That's true. With how big the void is, there may be the ruins of another Genesis world. If we can find it, then wouldn't we make a fortune? Bai Meifan's eyes lit up. He was a very calm young man, but as he was talking about a Genesis world now, he was naturally excited. Yet Ling Han thought that if his body could also evolve into a Genesis world, then wouldn't he be able to have whatever he wanted? Let's go. He patted Bai Meifan's shoulder. They had to hurry up. They only had 100,000 years. 100,000 years might seem very long, but for heavenly venerates, this was a pitifully short amount of time. They arrived at the fifth dimension and searched for that passageway. This did not take too much time. The two of them were very careful because Xian Chihu had also come here. He would definitely not let go of Ling Han, and if he had the chance, he would definitely kill him. Ling Han had confiscated a great many great herbs from the World Alliance, but left them for the Empress and the others. This was mostly because he needed too many resources to advance another step further, and this small amount of great herbs was actually not of much use to him. Thus, it would be better to let the Empress and the others have them. Their improvement would be obvious, and they would be able to significantly increase their strength. I'll go check things out and see if there is any ambush, Bai Meifan said. Ling Han was more inclined to believe that if Xian Chihu had arrived here long ago, he would definitely be clinging to the treasures of the 10th dimension. He should not have wasted time waiting for him here, but it was better to be safe than sorry, so he nodded. Bai Meifin walked over, and he came back after a while and gave Ling Han a gesture, indicating that it was safe. Ling Han and Bai Meifin passed through this passageway. They obviously didn't feel any change in space, but as they walked, the path ahead suddenly became clear. They had already appeared in another place. "Follow me," Ling Han said. He was a grandmaster of raw stone, and who could compare to him in the exploration for veins of raw stone? Bai Meifin hurriedly followed. "I say, are you also skilled in searching for veins of raw stone?" "Ha! Don't you know that I'm known as the mine exploration expert?" Ling Han joked. "I really couldn't tell," Bai Meifin said without fear. This was practically challenging his authority. "Then just wait and see." Not only was Ling Han exploring for veins, but he was also looking for a new spatial passageway that could lead to a higher level dimension. Since a passage had appeared here, perhaps there would be a second, a third, several hundred, or a few thousand. However, their luck was not that good. For the moment, they had not discovered a spatial passageway, though they had discovered a considerable number of veins of ore. With Ling Han mining them precisely, they obtained great herbs every time, which made Bai Meifin exclaim in disbelief. "You really are a grandmaster of raw stone?" he asked in surprise. It should be known that the heavenly venerable stone could cut off divine sense, and even heavenly venerates could not use their divine sense to penetrate them. "No, I am an ultimate grandmaster," Ling Han said jokingly. Bai Meifin couldn't help much in mine exploration, so he took the initiative to search for the spatial passageway. Even Ling Han did not have the ability to cheat for that, so he could only work hard and search bit by bit. Furthermore, this was the 10th dimension, which was incredibly dangerous. Occasionally, there would be energy storms that reached the 6th tier, surging out of the ground. Thus, whether it was exploring for veins of or searching for spatial passageways, one had to be extremely careful, as well as possess mighty strength. Otherwise, if one was not able to react in time, heavenly venerates with battle prowess below the 6th tier would only die. In truth, even elites with battle prowess of the 6th tier would have to be extremely careful. If they were hit by the energy storm, they might not die, but they would definitely be severely injured. If they were trapped by the energy storm, they would also die. Ling Han and Bai Meifin divided the work among themselves. There were even fewer people here, so the competition was naturally even smaller. Ling Han was also a cheat-level grandmaster of raw stone. It could be imagined just how astonishing his gains were. After a few thousand years, he had gathered over 200 great herbs, and one of them was an orange-colored great herb, which could be helpful in advancing one's cultivation level. Additionally, there were also a dozen heavenly venerable seals, but only one was a 7th grade seal. The others were all 9th or 8th grade, which he had long since obtained. Great herbs aren't bad either. It can increase my cultivation level, and at this stage, this should be what I need the most. Heavenly venerable seals are only icing on the cake. Ling Han felt that he had already found enough here. It would be best if Bai Meifin returned immediately and told him that he had found the passage to the dimensions even further underground. This had once been a Genesis world. So even if there are countless low-level dimensions that had been completely destroyed in the Great Explosion, there should still at least be around 1,000 dimensions remaining. Right now, they had only explored 10 dimensions. As for the remaining dimensions, there was an astonishingly large number of them. Ling Han left marks as he explored mines, anticipating his meetup with Bai Meifin again. However, it was destined that enemies would meet. On this day, after Ling Han had just found a large vein of ore and unearthed a few great herbs, he suddenly sensed an aura of life approaching him. Had Bai Meifin returned? Ling Han stopped what he was doing and turned around to look. A person appeared, bearing supreme dominance like an emperor, as if the whole world should obey him. Xin Chihu. Ling Han sighed upon seeing this. Why was it that whoever he didn't want to see would appear? Haha, Ling Han, you have delivered yourself to my doorstep. Xin Chihu, was also startled. That was because he had not deliberately been tracking Ling Han and had completely come here by coincidence. However, he did not hesitate in the slightest and immediately charged over. Thoughts sped quickly through Ling Han's mind. Of course, he could tear a rip into the void and return, but if he wanted to come back here again, it would take him a lot of time. He only had a total of 100,000 years and definitely could not waste it on making his way back here. Thus, he turned around and fled. Boom! 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 Xian Chihu pursued rapidly, attacking madly as he did so, wanting to kill Ling Han. Chapter 2933. 2933 Robbed Again. Chapter 2933. 2933 Robbed Again. 2933 Robbed Again. Ling Han channeled all the 9th grade seals and exploded with astonishing power for a short period of time. He also released all the dimensional projections in one go. 19 dimensions. Even Xian Chihu was shocked. He didn't expect that the 11 dimensions that he had seen Ling Han previously channel were far from his limit. You actually have 19 dimensions. Then there's even more reason to kill you, he said with killing intent. Pung, pung, pung. Xian Chihu exploded with power and under the crushing pressure of 6th-tier battle prowess. So what if there were 19 projections of medium-level dimensions? They could only be destroyed in an instant. However, seizing an opening in this instant, Ling Han had also won himself a sliver of a chance to escape. Heavenly Venerates were hard to kill. What more when Ling Han possessed 5th-tier battle prowess? Xiao! He fled, his figure extraordinarily fast. Fuck! Ling Han cursed vehemently. He couldn't tolerate it any longer. He was determined to advance to the 4th tier. I'm going into seclusion. This time, I won't come out unless I reach the 4th tier. He tunneled into the ground, with the heavenly venerable stone hiding his traces. Even 6th-tier elites couldn't find him with their divine sense. They would have to dig deep into the ground to find him physically. This should be quite safe. Little Bai, I'm sorry. Ling Han took out a great herb and began to munch madly. Bai Meifin's share was here, but he planned to eat all of it. It couldn't be helped. Though Ling Han was already in the late stage of the 3rd tier and seemed not to be far from the 4th tier, it was really too difficult for him to advance a little further. He needed a great amount of energy, so it was really a question whether these 200+ great herbs would be enough to send him to the peak stage of the 3rd tier. Forget it, just eat them. Ling Han ate a great herb, and the innumerable powers of dimension in his body vibrated at the same time, automatically channeling. They were like a millstone that was crushing the medicinal effects into endless, extremely pure energy, which was then rapidly absorbed. Digesting a great herb actually only took him a day's time. Ling Han was speechless with shock. He was becoming more and more freakish. If it was another 5th tier that was to eat this great herb, he would not be able to digest all of it without a year's time. The energy contained within was too terrifying. Ling Han's advancement through the cultivation levels was slow, but the benefits he received were also incredibly astonishing. Just take the power of dimension, for example. It could disperse and absorb the attacks of enemies. Who else could accomplish this? I'll have another. Crack! Ling Han took out another great herb and began to chew it. Then it was the 3rd, the 4th, as the number of great herbs decreased rapidly. His cultivation level was also slowly increasing. More than half a year later, there were only 3 great herbs left, and Ling Han's cultivation level was finally close to the peak stage of the 3rd tier. There are only 3 left, and they still can't send me to the peak stage of the 3rd tier. Ling Han frowned. If it was other 5th tiers, this would be enough to deliver them from the early stage of the 5th tier to the peak stage a few times over. However, I only need 10 great herbs to solve the problem. This shouldn't be too difficult to resolve. After Ling Han consumed the remaining 3 great herbs, he went out to search for new veins of ore. However, a few thousand years had already passed, and most of the raw stone veins here had already been mined. It was already difficult to find even a single vein of, or what more to harvest, about 10 great herbs. Ling Han's frown became deeper and deeper, yet he still roamed around in the surroundings. Even if he couldn't find veins of ore, just let him find a spatial passageway to enter a dimension further below. That way, it would definitely be no problem for him to obtain another 10 great herbs. As he was thinking, he suddenly discovered an aura crashing towards him from ahead. Heavenly Venerates would release their auras, but they would limit it within a specific range. The area within this range was equivalent to the Heavenly Venerates' absolute territory. Furthermore, in this dangerous place, this territory was naturally even more important, as various bits of information could be fed back to the Heavenly Venerate in the nick of time, so they could avoid danger in advance. Ling Han naturally had also released his own aura. He had crashed into the other's aura, and the other person had also crashed into his. Both of them were shocked, and then discovered that the other party was extremely strong, not inferior to themselves at all. Then, in the next instant, they saw each other. Feng Wuding. How coincidental was this? The so-called, it was destined that enemies would meet. Ling Han let out a battle cry and laughed. Without another word, he immediately rushed up and began fighting. Ling Han. Feng Wuding only had time to roar in fury before he had no choice but to counterattack. He knew how powerful Ling Han was, and there was no third person here. Even if he was killed, no one would be able to find out that it was Ling Han. He counterattacked with all his might, directly channeling his full power. He was the son of destiny of the Genesis world from the last generation, and would become the only sovereign in the world in future. It was extremely possible that he would surpass the 7th tier, so how could he die here? Pung, pung, pung. However, what greeted him was Ling Han's iron fist. He was boosted by 8th grade seals, and though only half was used, they could increase his power by as many as 500 times. This was something that Feng Wuding could not match, no matter what secret technique he used. Feng Wuding was beaten up, and he was extremely depressed. Just think, he was the son of destiny of the Genesis world from the last generation. But why had he encountered Ling Han? The latter had shattered all of his confidence to bits. Ling Han's eyes were cold. He did not care what kind of prodigy Feng Wuding was. Feng Wuding was in the World Alliance, and the World Alliance had severely wounded his daughter and son-in-law. This debt had to be paid back in double. He had no enmity with Feng Wuding, but who asked Feng Wuding to join the World Alliance? But just as Ling Han was about to deliver a fatal strike, he sensed another aura, which was incredibly powerful. The third person soon appeared. It was Wu Haoyang. A thought immediately flashed through Ling Han's mind. Should he kill him or not? If he killed him, then unless he killed Wu Haoyang to keep him quiet, Heavenly Venerate Chongyan and the other 7th-tier elites would probably abandon everything else and ignore hysteria to seek Ling Han out for an accounting when they found out. By then, it would probably be very difficult to save him even with Lin Luo interfering. The problem was that, firstly, Ling Han could not kill Wu Haoyang to keep him quiet, and secondly, there was no reason for him to kill an innocent person, either. Forget it. He immediately made his decision, but it was one thing not to kill him. He still threw a punch, beating Feng Wuding to the point that he lost all ability to resist. Then he searched out the spatial tool that he possessed. With a sweep of his divine sense, Ling Han couldn't help but look pleased. There were actually 14 great herbs inside, and they were all yellow-colored great herbs. Thanks. Ling Han laughed loudly and casually tossed Feng Wuding onto the ground. Then he nodded at Wu Haoyang, turned and left. Wu Haoyang did not stop him. This was not the realm battlefield, so how could there be so many rules? As long as Ling Han did not kill anyone, it would be fine. But now, all these great herbs had actually benefited his rival. How could Feng Wuding not be fuming with anger? Ah! He roared in fury. Chapter 2934. 2934 Breaking Through to Fourth Tier. Chapter 2934. 2934 Breaking Through to Fourth Tier. 2934 Breaking Through to Fourth Tier. It would be best to keep this kind of wealth-delivering boy alive. Ling Han nodded. Killing Feng Wuding would not be enough to vent his hatred. His target was Yu Boron. Then let's decide on this happily. Ling Han found another safe place and began to consume great herbs. 10 days passed, and he had also digested 10 great herbs, but he was still a sliver away from the peak stage of the third tier. Fortunately, the wealth-sending boy is generous enough. There are still 4 great herbs left. Ling Han mumbled to himself and began chewing on great herbs again. 1 wasn't enough, and 2 were also a bit lacking. It was only right when he devoured the 3rd great herb that Ling Han finally reached the peak stage of the 3rd tier. I should spend some time tempering my foundations. However, there are endless powers of dimension in my body, which is equivalent to a millstone that has already tempered my power to an incredibly pure level. Moreover, I don't have any more time. I will immediately begin breaking through to the 4th tier. Ling Han channeled all the heavenly venerable seals. In the first place, this was a means to communicate with fundamental particles. With more than 200 seals channeling at the same time, his spirit expanded endlessly to sense the 3rd fundamental power of the heaven and earth. Previously, he had spent several 100 million years to achieve this, but now he could not afford that much time. I have to sense the 3rd fundamental particle as quickly as possible. Ling Han took out that orange-colored great herb, thought for a while, and then immediately began to chew on it. He believed that he would be able to break through to the 4th tier without relying on this kind of great herb, but this could possibly take 1 to 2 billion years. He did not have that much time to waste now. Weren't great herbs saved up for the purpose of consumption? In just a few bites, this great herb had completely entered Ling Han's stomach. Not long after, a great many particles appeared in his mind, as many as the stars in the sky. Although there were countless of them, they could still be categorized. There were a total of 6 types, and the 2 types of power in Ling Han's body immediately resonated with 2 types of starlight particles, causing the light emitted by these particles to become even more dazzling. These were the fundamental particles, Ling Han thought. No wonder the orange-colored great herb could help heavenly venerates advance their cultivation level. This was equivalent to materializing the fundamental particles. However, the moment his divine sense touched them, those starlight particles immediately dimmed and rapidly disappeared. Ling Han tensed. Even if he had ingested a great herb, it did not mean that he would definitely be able to break through. It could only offer him some help. He calmed down and no longer touched them blindly. Instead, he only targeted one particular type. The fundamental particles repelled each other. If he was greedy and wanted to master all the fundamental particles in one go, the result would only be that he would not be able to get anything. He targeted a single type of particle and continued to touch it, increasing his sensitivity to this kind of particle. The effects of the great herb were very short-term, and after merely half a day his mind dimmed, and he could no longer sense the slightest bit of it. Ling Han did not feel the slightest bit of regret. He once again released his divine sense, which enshrouded his surroundings. The mark of the 3rd fundamental particle had already been left in his mind. Now he only had to communicate with the actual fundamental particle through this mark. Time slowly crept by. 10 days, 100 days over 7,000 years later, Ling Han's divine sense suddenly trembled. Joy instantly spread across his face. He had finally communicated with the 3rd fundamental particle. Come. Over 200 heavenly venerable seals lit up at the same time, continuously absorbing such particles into his body, increasing Ling Han's power. This was the mesotron particle. Ling Han suppressed the need for energy in the powers of dimension in his body, and focused on extracting these particles to increase his power, temper his physique, and stabilize his cultivation level. Everything else could be done slowly. He could not rush things. 100,000 years was too short. In the void, 3 figures were presently rapidly flying past. Upon a closer look, each of them was strange-looking. They were either multi-armed, multi-legged, multi-headed, or multi-eyed. These were Hysteria's creations. These 3 monsters all exuded a violent aura. They were incredibly strong, but their eyes were filled with the brilliance of intelligence. They were definitely not something that those monsters that only knew slaughter could compare to. They arrived at the Genesis world of the last era. They descended, and as their eyes swept over the surroundings, a change took place in their bodies. They became human, and their aura similarly changed. They became no different from normal humans. They walked slowly, searching for clues. These were 3 6th-tier monsters, and their mission was very simple, and that was to kill 2 people. One of them was Ling Han, while the other was Feng Wuding. After spending another 30,000 years, Ling Han had finally stabilized his cultivation as a 4th tier. I still have a lot of room for improvement, he said to himself. The maximum number of dimensions that he could develop in his body had suddenly increased to as many as 137. Furthermore, the upper limit in quality of these dimensions was also close to a high-level dimension now. Additionally, the powers of dimension could also be improved now. However, the time needed for this would be much, much too long. Even if he was given 1 billion years, that would probably be just barely enough time. Right now, he couldn't care less. His priority was mine, exploration, and unearthing raw stones. After his cultivation level had increased, Ling Han's luck suddenly seemed to have improved. Not many days later, he discovered a spatial passageway. He was already fearless now. Even if he encountered Xian Chihu again, he was confident that he could put up a fight now. After entering the passageway, space overlapped and changed. After half a day, Ling Han finally entered the ruins of another dimension. He was definitely not the first person to come here, but this was not one of the first 10 dimensions, because the traces of veins of or being mined were still very new. Boom! An energy storm surged out violently 30 meters in front of Ling Han. Ling Han's heroic spirit soared, and he threw a punch at the energy storm. Pum! The power of the punch surged, and a hole was actually punched open in the energy storm. This hole did not close up even after a long time had passed. Only after the force of Ling Han's punch completely dissipated did the hole in the energy storm begin to close, and rapidly disappeared. My battle prowess should barely be on the level of the 6th tier. Ling Han had gained a more direct understanding. I can only be ranked among the weakest 6th tiers. It couldn't be helped. He hadn't cultivated to the pinnacle of this cultivation level, so he could only be regarded as a weak 6th tier with battle prowess like this. However, no matter how weak he was still a 6th tier elite. He was still overwhelmingly impressive. If I advance another step further, I will be able to possess the battle prowess of a 7th tier elite. Ling Han's eyes lit up. If he reached the 7th tier, he would no longer need to worry about the energy storm here or the super flames formed by the fundamental particles, and could mine the treasures from the Genesis world of the last era completely. At that time, his cultivation level would definitely soar, allowing him to charge into the 7th tier, even in terms of cultivation level. Then his battle prowess would reach an unimaginable level of strength. I wonder where that by Myphin went. Ling Han mumbled to himself. Forget it. I'll just harvest some great herbs first and give that brat a portion as compensation. He began to explore the mines. Though he had come here very late, with his incomparable ability of exploration and mining, he had already harvested another 20-odd great herbs and 3 heavenly venerable seals in a mere century. He had just found a new vein of ore, and had not yet begun to explore it. But then he looked like he was listening attentively. There was the sound of battle. Fighting here was naturally a very normal thing. At first, Ling Han did not take it to heart, but as the shock waves from the battle became more and more intense, he managed to sense a familiar aura. By Myfin, he was fighting with someone. Ling Han immediately dashed toward the location of the battle. His lackey was in trouble, so how could he stand by and watch as the boss? It was only a matter of a few steps, and he was already close to the area where the battle was taking place. He saw that Bai Myfin was indeed fighting fiercely with someone, and his opponent was shockingly Feng-Wuding. Chapter 2935 2935 Crushed. Chapter 2935 2935 Crushed. 2935 Crushed. Ling Han really felt like complaining. Why was it Feng-Wuding again? Was he really going to become his wealth-delivering boy? Bai, I'll ask you for the last time, where is Ling Han? Feng-Wuding shouted loudly. His voice was extremely harsh and filled with oppressiveness. He was completely suppressing Bai Myfin, showing strength that surpassed the latter by not only just a little bit, because he had already advanced to the 4th tier. Feng-Wuding, as a 4th tier, had abilities that had directly soared to the peak stage of the 5th tier, and he was presently only in the early stage of the 4th tier. He was sure that by the time he reached the middle stage of the 4th tier, or at most the late stage, his battle prowess would be able to leap into the 6th tier. The Son of Destiny was indeed extraordinary. Although Bai Myfin was incredibly freakish, compared with Feng-Wuding, he was not just a little bit weaker. His battle prowess was also close to peak stage 5th tier, but while they were both at the peak stage of the 5th tier, there was still a difference. Moreover, when it came to heavenly venerable seals, there was also a huge gap between the two of them. Thus, Bai Myfin was at a complete disadvantage, vomiting blood continuously from the barrage. Haha, I don't know Ling Han like the back of my hand, so how would I know? Though Bai Myfin was outmatched, his expression was still very carefree. He was completely unconcerned and fought with all his might. Would Feng-Wuding dare to kill him? Just like how no one dared to kill Feng-Wuding, no one dared to kill Bai Myfin either, unless they could destroy him so completely that no secrets would be leaked at all. Who in this world would be able to escape the pursuit of a vengeful 7th tier elite? However, though Feng-Wuding didn't dare to kill Bai Myfin, he was completely capable of severely wounding and ruthlessly humiliating him. This was a grudge between juniors. What more when it was a battle of equal cultivation levels? So even if Bai Fan found out, how could he bring himself to seek out Feng-Wuding? Even if he disregarded his pride, how could Heavenly Venerate Chong-Yen and the others be easily trifled with? Bai Myfin used all his powerful moves, yet he was outmatched. He could only fight and flee at the same time. What do you mean by the greatest prodigy of all eternity? You're nothing but trash. Feng-Wuding smirked coldly. He had suffered greatly at Ling Han's hands, but within the same cultivation level, only Ling Han could suppress him. Faced with any other prodigy, he was completely at the upper hand. Don't forget, you were almost pummeled into idiocy by my brother, Bai Myfin mocked. Feng-Wuding's expression immediately turned dark. The greatest humiliation he had endured in this life came from Ling Han. Ling Han shook his head. In the past, Bai Myfin was such a nice person, filled with sunshine, but now he had actually learned to speak toxic words. Who knew who it was that had led him astray? If the Empress and the others were present, they would definitely point at his nose and say, "It's you, it's you." Bai Myfin was fleeing, but Feng-Wuding wasn't the only one here. There were also 2 other 5th-tier elites from the World Alliance, and they both moved to block him. These 2 5th tiers were not stronger than Bai Myfin, but they didn't need to defeat him. They only needed to block him for a while, so that Feng-Wuding would catch up to him. Humph! If Ling Han dares to appear again, I will definitely teach him a lesson. Feng-Wuding said coldly. He was now a 4th tier, and his ability could not be compared to when he was a 3rd tier. He would definitely sweep aside all others who had 5th tier battle prowess. Oh, how do you plan to teach me? Ling Han said with a smile. With a step, he had already appeared beside Bai Meifan. When they saw Ling Han, the two fifth tiers from the World Alliance couldn't help but feel shocked. They actually didn't dare to make a move. Their psychological trauma was too great. Previously, Ling Han had single-handedly wiped the floor with all 9 great fifth-tier elites of the World Alliance. Now, there were only 2 of them, so how were they supposed to stop Ling Han? Ling Han? Bai Meifan was startled. He had not thought that Ling Han would actually appear at such a crucial time. Ling Han, Feng Wuding said through gritted teeth. He was filled with hatred. Ling Han was unconcerned. We haven't seen each other for such a long time, and you have already advanced to the 4th tier. Looks like you have obtained quite a number of great herbs. Even if Feng Wuding's cultivation speed was astonishing, it was still impossible for him to advance to the 4th tier in just a few thousand years. He had to have obtained a considerable number of great herbs. At the mention of great herbs, Feng Wuding's expression darkened even further. He had already been robbed twice by Ling Han and was presently filled with anger. Ling Han, today, I will show you what the Son of Destiny means, he roared in fury and charged over. Ling Han casually threw out a punch, appearing to be at ease. You have advanced into 4th tier, so how could it be that I have not? The slower his progress was, the more explosive his burst of power would be when he actually broke through. Pung! It was only a single punch, and Feng Wuding was sent flying, throwing up blood continuously. S6 tier battle prowess. Feng Wuding's face was as white as a sheet. He had 5th tier battle prowess, but even if he was at the peak stage of the 5th tier, so what? Faced with 6th tier battle prowess, he would only be bleeding and battered. His expression was filled with disbelief as his pride had suffered a lot of damage. Wasn't that so? He thought of himself as extraordinary. He was the son of destiny. However, he was also in the early stage of the 4th tier, and his battle prowess was only at the peak stage of the 5th tier. Though he could defeat all those with 5th tier battle prowess, he was still very far from reaching the 6th tier. However, Ling Han had reached the 6th tier in terms of actual battle prowess. With such a comparison, wasn't the gap between the 2 of them clear at a single glance? However, Feng Wuding couldn't accept this. It was one thing for him to be suppressed by Ling Han when he had been in the 3rd tier, but now he was already in the 4th tier. The higher the cultivation level, the greater his advantage as the Son of Destiny should be. On the contrary, Ling Han had now left him far behind. Could it be that his title as the Son of Destiny was just an empty label? Feng Wuding's pride couldn't accept such a result. But no matter how freakish he was, no matter how he used powerful moves, 5th tier battle prowess couldn't possibly reach the 6th tier. The gap was as wide as the sky. Just like how Ling Han was strong enough, right? But when he was in 3rd tier, he could not advance his battle prowess to the 6th tier no matter how hard he tried. Feng Wuding could only be thrashed, and he was very soon battered and bloody, looking just like Bai Meifan. Good fight. Bai Meifan clapped, and at the same time he was also filled with shock. Ling Han's battle prowess was already at the 6th tier, and he was only 1 step away from reaching the 7th tier. At that time, he would really be standing at the apex and would no longer be subject to any restrictions. Ling Han only thrashed Feng Wuding, and did not intend to kill him, though there was great enmity between him and the World Alliance. Feng Wuding himself actually had not done any evil. It was just very coincidental and very unlucky that he had joined the World Alliance. Moreover, Feng Wuding was his wealth-delivering boy. This guy had received priority nurturing from the World Alliance and had a lot of treasures on him. Ling Han should be shearing him in waves like wool, but he could not bear to kill him. Just as he was fighting to his heart's content, Ling Han suddenly felt 3 terrifying auras sweep towards him. 6th tier, 6th tier, 6th tier. As he was startled, The 3 auras had already approached, and 3 people appeared. He didn't recognize any of them, and they were all extremely unfamiliar to him. There were a total of around 106 tier elites in the Genesis world, and Ling Han had seen over half of them before. Thus, it was normal that he didn't recognize the 3 people in front of him. However, these 3 6th-tier heavenly venerates gave him a strange feeling. However, he couldn't put his finger on what was off for the moment. The eyes of these 3 6th-tier elites swept over them and immediately locked onto Ling Han. 2 5th tiers of the World Alliance hurriedly asked for help from these 3 6th tiers. Seniors, please lend a hand to save Feng Wooding. He is the one that the 7th tiers. Chapter 2936, 2,936 Hunters. Chapter 2936, 2,936 Hunters. 2,936 Hunters. Poo-pew. However, before the 2 5th tiers could finish speaking, one of the 6th tiers had already moved. With a single strike, the 2 of them were vomiting blood, severely wounded. And this was still because they were at the 5th tier. If they were at the 4th tier, they would definitely be killed with a single strike. Ling Han, Bai Meifan, and Feng Wooding were all shocked. What did these 3 people mean by their actions? Seniors. The 2 5th tiers coughed up blood, their eyes filled with confusion. Why had they suddenly suffered such an attack? Ling Han's heart shuddered, and realization suddenly dawned on him. He said to Bai Meifan, "Leave first." Bai Meifan looked towards him, his expression filled with confusion. He was the descendant of a 7th tier, although the 3 people on the other side were 6 tiers. Did they dare to make a move on him? It should be known that he had the means left behind by a 7th tier. Once he died, Bai Fan would immediately know everything. The higher the cultivation level, the clearer one would be about how terrifying a 7th tier was. Even these 3 people wouldn't dare to do such a thing. Idiot, they are Hysteria's subordinates. Ling Han shouted. He finally discovered what was off about these 3 people. That was because they were the creations of Hysteria, so there was an incredibly strange component in their auras. What? Only now did Bai Meifan get a great shock. If these 3 people were Hysteria's creations, then he wouldn't have to worry about them not attacking him at all. In any case, they were already mortal enemies, to say nothing of killing a descendant of a 7th tier, even if they killed the descendants of all the 7th tiers, so what? What about you? He asked Ling Han. I will fight them. Ling Han was filled with fighting spirit. All right. Bai Meifan made the decision, turned and ran. He ran, but the 3 6th tiers did not give chase. They merely stared at Ling Han and Feng Wooding, and their aura gradually changed. What was originally only a bit of a cold aura completely spread out now, exuding endless evil. At the same time, their forms also changed. One sprouted a few more arms, another grew out more legs, and the last had 7 heads. Hysteria's creations had many unique traits. The difference was that their eyes were exuding the luster of intelligence. This was understandable. If they hadn't possessed such intelligence, they wouldn't have been able to find this place at all. They would have long since been lost in the void. After such a long time, Hysteria finally made its move. Ling Han was filled with lofty aspirations. He had just advanced to the 4th tier and wanted to test out his own battle prowess. With a shake of Ling Han's right hand, Feng Wooding was knocked unconscious so that this guy would not cause trouble for him in battle. Ling Han smiled faintly. Are you here to kill me or him? Feng Wooding was the person who had been chosen by the Genesis world of the last era. Perhaps Hysteria would also feel wary. Who knew what secrets this guy was hiding in his body? It was possible that they would only be unleashed when he reached the 5th tier, 6th tier, or even the 7th tier, eventually posing a threat to Hysteria. You both have to die! A 6th tier monster spoke up, its voice dry, as if it had just learned to speak. Ling Han pondered for a moment before shaking his head. and saying, "Normally, I wouldn't care at all whether this person lives or dies. However, if Hysteria wants to kill him, I want to save him." He shrunk Feng Wooding's body with his powerful abilities, transforming it into a tiny that he casually stored away. "Come on then." Ling Han crooked a finger at the 3 6th-tier monsters. The 3 monsters immediately charged over. Boom! Frightening battle prowess surged, rumbling out towards Ling Han. They were very strong, all of them peak stage 6th tiers. He was sure that Hysteria had to have paid a great price to create these 3 monsters. This attack was at peak stage 6th tier, so it was obvious that they wanted to succeed with the first strike. Ling Han shook his head. If he had encountered these 3 monsters when he had still been at the 3rd tier, he would definitely have been outmatched. He could only have immediately torn a rip into the void and returned afterwards. Otherwise, staying for an extra instant could have possibly spelled death for him. As for now, he was confident that he could put up a fight. Boom! He channeled all the 8th grade seals, and his battle prowess instantly soared madly. He let out a battle cry and brandished fists of fury to meet the incoming attack. Pum! Ling Han exchanged a blow with the 3 monsters, and his body suddenly shook. He felt blood rush upwards in his body, which made him feel very terrible. In a battle of 1 against 3, Ling Han still enjoyed the upper hand. This was natural because these 3 monsters had not channeled Heavenly Venerable Seals, and Ling Han had directly closed the gap of 1,000 times between the power of both sides. He would not lose even if it was 1 against 3. However, the 3 monsters immediately made a comeback. A Heavenly Venerable Seal lit up on each of them, instantly increasing their battle prowess by more than 70 times. 2nd grade seals. Thankfully, every monster only channeled a 2nd grade seal. If they were also using combination seals, then Ling Han would really be having a headache. He would not be qualified to resist at all. Boom! They exchanged blows again. This time, it was Ling Han's turn to be outmatched. The 3 great 6th tiers had boosted themselves with 2nd grade seals, and their battle prowess had increased explosively by more than 70 times. They had once again gained the upper hand in terms of power, and it was a crushing advantage at that. Ling Han let out a battle cry, and the 19-dimensional projections were unleashed together, suppressing the 3 6th tiers. However, it was utterly useless. The 6th tier was too strong, and the dimensions inside Ling Han's body hadn't caught up to his cultivation level yet. They were only medium-level dimensions, so how could they suppress a 6th tier? Pum! Merely being shaken by the aura of 6th tier, these dimensional projections were all turned into pieces. Ling Han sighed internally. If he had let out a real dimension, it could still just barely withstand a few blows. However, if it was a dimensional projection, the gap would be too great and would have no effect at all. As he fought, he continued to retreat. This was a battle of 1 against 3, and they were all peak stage 6th tiers at that. It would be strange if he really won. The 3 6th tiers pursued him closely. They only had one thought in mind, and that was to kill. No matter where Ling Han fled, they would persist and not give up. No matter who stood in their way, they would kill them without mercy. Ling Han was very calm. At present, he also had 6th tier battle prowess. If he wanted to kill someone at the same cultivation level as him, it would be as difficult as ascending the heavens. He had no intention to fight to the death without retreating. However, a peak stage 6th tier was indeed powerful. No matter how Ling Han switched directions, they would always be able to firmly cling on to him. No matter what he tried, Ling Han would not be able to shake them off. Time flew by as one side fled and the other side pursued. Before long, 300 years had already passed. Ling Han continued to use the energy storms here to delay them, and even caused these 3 6th tiers to suffer a little. However, they ignored it completely and continued to pursue him closely. Dregs of Hysteria, take this! A loud battle cry rang out, and two figures charged over at the same time. Xian Qihu and Wu Haoyang. It was clear that the two greatest prodigies of all eternity had obtained great fortune here. Their cultivation level had already reached the peak stage of the 5th tier. However, this was the real difficulty. Just think, they had all been stuck at the 4th tier for an epoch before finally advancing to the 5th tier. It could be imagined that without a Crimson Great Herb, they might have to take 2, 3, or even more epochs to advance to the 6th tier. However, with the cultivation level of peak stage 5th tier, added with their freakishness, the strength of their battle prowess was definitely terrifying. They charged over from the sidelines and just happened to intercept those 3 6th tier monsters. The two sides immediately came to blows, and the battle was incredibly intense.